Hi, 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 hi everyone. It's the 14th of May at 2:11 p.m. This is the final class for Researcher Development 2. Unfortunately, we can't be together, as has been tradition for this auspicious event, the POP rehearsal, known by its proper acronym, Piles of Pizza. Unfortunately, of course, there's no chance for us to gather for pizza under the conditions of the pandemic, but I think we all agree that the fact we can gather at all means we're, lucky in some important ways. The real sad and disappointing thing for Alex and myself, and I know I speak for Alex here, I want to apologise to all of you, students of RD2, that we weren't able to provide even a pizza voucher for you. We defaulted on the stated promises in the learning documents you were provided with. We've been advised that the budgetary impact on the university is so great that even something as important as the ritual pizza ceremony is unfortunately on the chopping block. And has indeed been chopped, was chopped, is chopped, shall remain chopped, shall never be unchopped, because we can never have this moment again. But we just wanted to formally note our apologies. Alex, is there anything you'd like to add? I would like you to add and culminate that apology, if you would.
To add some toppings to the apology.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm really sorry that we can't do this too. I mean, Jack and I think I might have explained to you guys before that Jack and I we take the piles of pizza thing really seriously. It's really having food with people. Having a meal with people is a really important human ritual. And this is this moment in the sequence of the MRes for you guys is like the beginning of the end of the beginning of the end of the beginning. This is the where the kind of the training kind of ends and you have to kind of go out into the field, as it were, and kind of fend for yourself. So it's a really important symbolic moment in the trajectory of your candidature, and marking it by sharing a meal is a really nice human thing to do. So it is with some regret, quite a lot of regret and shame that we are not able to.
Piles of regret.
The piles of regret, yeah. And on a purely selfish level, Jack and I take great pride every year in charging the university some hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for pizza. And that we're not able to have a ridiculous, what was the record so far, Jack? $1,100 for pizza, which we got charged tax for. So it was 100% more than that. It was $2,000 worth of pizza.
Yeah. It was something like 18 pizzas from Crust. It was pretty serious.
Yeah. So yeah, on a personal level and a professional level, the professional being the opportunity to charge the university thousands of dollars for pizza, and the personal being the connection with you guys. It's a shame that we can't do that.
And just for my own part, and I know Alex feels the same, I'd like to just make a sort of an emphatic existential statement about just how much I love pizza. Just what a great joy on this planet pizza is. And even I reckon I have pizza like an average of 6 times a month between like 1 or 2 orders and a couple of make at homes, possibly more with leftovers and stuff. Like I love pizza so much, and I want you guys who I trust and care about to know that about me. So I just felt I needed to share that. I had some great pizza last night as well.
Beautiful.
Oh God, I really want pizza now. What we should do here is, I guess, let everyone know how the session is going to run. We're recording at the moment. We've got a couple of volunteers queued up. The normal, as in previous semesters, normal approach to this session is to give you a little bit of a bit of insight about the POP, kind of the genre, the format. It's quite a peculiar thing to write a big proposal and then give it to people and then present to them, even though they've read it and they've got it in front of them. So kind of helping you understand that dynamic is really helpful for allowing you to deliver a good, strong proposal, presentation. Yeah, as I said, we'll give some tips and advice, but because we've only got 2 volunteers, we'll probably have a couple more come out of the woodwork, but I think we can fold a lot of advice in as we go. So, Alex, do you want to maybe kick off with a few comments about how to think? You're starting at a high level. Like, what's the purpose of writing a document, but then having to go and speak to it? Why isn't it just one or the other? Why does the university do it like this, including, of course, for the PhD and the COC? Why do we do it like this?
So, in the first, there are at least 2 reasons why we have this kind of deliver and then present mode. One of them is simply to kind of prove that you know things. That is that it is conceivable that somebody could produce a piece of written text that's very good, but not actually know anything about their subject matter. And in terms of being able to ensure that your candidature progresses as you want it to progress and as the university wants it to progress, and so as to ensure that the structures are available to support you, something like an oral presentation is a great way of gauging where you are and whether you're ready to progress. That's how it works here in the MRes, how it works in the PhD as well. If you go on to a PhD with the confirmation of candidature, the process is almost identical. You have to produce, I think in most COCs, it's something like a 10,000 word document. It's basically after the first kind of 9 months, first year or so of your.
I think it's 5 to 6,000 usually.
Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, to kind of really see like how much are you across what you need to be across as a candidate at this stage of wherever you are. But one of the other main reasons to do this is to give you the opportunity to talk about your research in a way that you might not have an opportunity to do in the context of the structure of the document. So the nature of a proposal document is, like all of you have experienced this by now, it's quite constraining. Like there are lots of things that you can't mention, that you can't talk about, and you can't do anything like enthuse, simply enthuse about your subject matter and kind of wax about it, And a presentation like this gives you that opportunity to say, I think this is super cool. These are the things that I think are really rad and interesting. They didn't find their way into the proposal because that's not the kind of stuff that we talk about necessarily in the proposal. But also it gives you the chance to elaborate on points that you might bring up in the proposal, or especially in the context of the MRes POP and the PhD COC and all of the other acronyms, is to ask questions. And that is, it's a milestone, and it's a check-in milestone, not just for the university and your supervisor to check in on you, but it's a check-in milestone for you to check in on the university as well and your supervisors. So it's a kind of formal ritual kind of mechanism of communication between all of the members of the team, as it were, to see where are we, what are we doing, what are we excited about, what do we want to do, where do we want to go, what might we do differently, stuff like that. So the idea is to kind of, whereas the notion when you submit a written document is that this is the final thing and like this is what it is, adding the oral element to it opens it up into a discussion. So the attempt is to try and make it a living kind of process. Sometimes you hear that referred to as a living document. The proposal that you put forward at this stage is the thing that kind of provokes the discussion. That's why everyone reads it first, and then they come into the room. Here it's going to be on Zoom or whatever, and they talk about it. The main mechanism here, even though it kind of feels like right now, if you're finishing off your draft proposal or if you just finished it, it feels like that's the main thing. At the moment, the main thing is the discussion. and it's a really nice way to be able to talk about your work. And communicate about your work as well. And like, I think, who was it, Drew, I think said, like, when you have questions, when there are problems within your project that you can't resolve, it's a great way to say, I've got this problem and I can't figure it out. And that's like, sometimes, you know, to our undergraduate selves, that sounds counterintuitive. Like, we're thinking, shit, I've got a problem. I'm not supposed to have problems. I'm supposed to know all of the things. But, you know, we're all researchers now, and not knowing stuff is our business. Like, it's our duty not to know stuff. And so when we know that we don't know something, like, that's a really good sign. So if you're kind of going into your panel with a kind of really sharp kind of question about some kind of aspect of your method, or, you know, some research that's gone on in the past that's unclear, like whatever it is, if it's kind of deep in your territory, then everyone's going to kind of sit back and go, cool, this person's
do you want to keep going on that thread, Alex, but maybe talk a bit about the actual response to questions element of it? Because we're talking here about how, you know, presenters can sort of pose questions or frame questions, but what about the actual Q&A part at the end? What should people expect, and what's the kind of mindset to be in, and how can one prepare for that?
So obviously it varies, you know, a lot by, not just by discipline, but by the people who are in the room and the kind of the norms of the school, or the kind of department. Not that we really have departments here, but the kind of groupings that we have here. But generally, like, the idea is that you often, not usually, often, somebody on the panel will be tasked with asking questions. And, you know, it's a matter of kind of professional pride, but it's also a matter of, you know, being a good steward of your field, that if somebody is seeking entry into the realm of research, which is what you're doing here in the POP, that you ask them the hard questions. And one of the interesting pieces of feedback that we've gotten from MRes students over the years, I think I might have mentioned this in a previous office hours, was that responses to questions were often the things that mattered most to the panel. That is, even your presentation is prepared and can be scripted, and, you know, you can practice for it, but what panels get a lot out of is asking a curly question about your project, and you having thought about it already, that topic already, and being able to have a response, which means that on your part, you need to do a little bit of thinking, like, what are the kind of things that my supervisors or the panel might ask me about this project?
Yes, that's a good note, because there's the things you can anticipate. And then there's also one of the famous examples of a great response in the MRes POPs is when Kyle Howard Smith, who's a few years ago now, maybe Drew, you know Kyle, maybe some others do as well.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact question he was asked, but it was quite a tricky one, and he was able to refer to a paper that had just been published that looked at that exact thing that, you know, half the panel hadn't seen yet, maybe all the panel hadn't seen. It was a fresh publication. And so it's the kind of thing where that's a demonstration of you being a person in the field who just kind of, not all of you are going to get that lucky. It's pretty sort of rare that something like that happens, but it's an example of how, like, there's a lot of stuff, as Alex said, that's not in the proposal, and a lot of stuff that won't even come out in questions. But if you just kind of, you know, you've been absorbing stuff in your field for at least a year now, sort of more if you've been going part-time. And yeah, it really helps to bolster the panel's view of your viability as a candidate, when you can talk knowledgeably beyond the proposal. So, I mean, that's a big bar, because it sounds like a big bar, I should say, because it's not like, you know, you could take that to be like, oh God, I've got to know everything about my field so I can give witty answers or intelligent answers. It's not necessarily that. It's just that understand that your responses can really draw on what else is out there in the field. What, you know, if you get asked a question that say something about your methodology doesn't actually seem viable, like you haven't spotted it yet, but the panel says this is actually probably going to be a bit tricky. And then you can say, okay, that's good feedback. I hadn't really realized that. I guess I can think of some other papers that do, there's other research that does does this a slightly different way that might be a bit more manageable. Or I've seen this component of someone's work and I could just kind of do a replication of that or something similar to that. So, there's lots of little, even simple things where you're sort of almost half bluffing. Like I'm all advising you to lie, but it's that kind of confidence where you just say, yeah, no, good. It's a really good, and this leads us on to how you should respond to questions as well. Thank people for their questions. That's a really good, really interesting point. It's fine if someone pulls you up or like identifies something either definitely problematic or like maybe something that's unclear. If you know that, oh, okay, I just need to explain that a little better. I mustn't have explained it well. You can say, oh, thanks for that. Let me try and articulate that a little more clearly for you. Whereas if someone gets something that you hadn't anticipated, asks something that you hadn't anticipated, you can at least have the presence of mind to say, it's a really good question. I don't think I've thought about that sufficiently now that you raise it. I think I got a bit lost down the other methodological path, and now it makes sense, I suppose, why I wasn't sort of being able to make that one work out. So thanks for, you can just totally say, yeah, oh, that's a really good point. You are right. That's not going to work. Good.
There's one question that if ever I'm on a panel like this, that I always ask if I can, and it has to do with method. And it kind of comes back to one of the things that we talk about in week 0, actually, which is ontology and epistemology. That is, your project is seeking to know something about something, and there's almost certainly more than one way to know about that thing. And I try to ask a question along the lines of, why didn't you choose the other method? Or you chose method X, why didn't you choose Y or Z? Like, what are your reasons for not choosing those methods? Because what that does for me as a panel member, if you can answer that question, and if it wasn't explained in the proposal, which it usually isn't, because usually in a proposal, you're kind of explaining why you're choosing things that you're choosing rather than why you're not choosing the things that you're not choosing. If you have an answer to that, and a good answer, that reassures me as a panel member that you've thought about your subject matter and the different ways to approach it, and you've ruled them out. Like, you really have thought, okay, there is that method, but I'm not choosing it for this reason because I think it's problematic, for whatever reasons. As a panel member, that's solid for me, because that gives me a sense that A, you know what you're doing and you've read, but also really, really importantly, like, you've thought about it. Like, you've really thought about what is it that I'm trying to know and how can I know about it. And just to touch on a point from Jack as well, about reading. One of the weird things for me that I didn't realize until I started supervising people was that you're better read, probably, now than many of your supervisors. That is, like Jack mentioned, that moment with Kyle where he had read the journal article that at least some of the panel members hadn't read. That'll become more and more common. And that's a great, it's a great thing to be able to show off to your panel members that, yeah, I read the thing that came out the other week. Have you read it yet? Oh, you haven't? Oh, that's yeah. You should totally read it.
Before your POP, take a look at the current issue, that's the webpage for the current issue of one of the prominent journals in your field, and just see if there's anything in there that's been published in the last, one.
All you need to say, there's a really interesting paper published in X that I haven't read yet, but I'd really like to have a look at it. And they go, oh, cool. Well, you're obviously across the
boom.
What's coming out in the journal. Yeah, so much capital in that kind of statement.
Because it's performative, not in a misleading way, of course. Not in a deceiving.
You're trying to persuade a bunch of people to let you through a gate.
Yeah.
That's what's going on here.
So I feel like we can probably hold questions. I'm sure you guys have some questions. Do you think we should hold them until we go through our volunteers and then see if some of the things you're wondering about shake out in how we respond there, and then we can address anything further afterwards? Does that plan sound all right, or are there any kind of burning questions that people feel they need to ask kind of now quickly, like general ones? No, I'll take that silence as the affirmative, whatever it is. We'll we'll do questions after. So that means I guess we can move to Callum, and then we're going to do Hasto. So Callum, have you just before you get going, what have you prepared? Have you, just so we understand, have you got like a full slide deck ready to go? Are you going to do a screen share and present? Like what have you got for us?
Yeah, it's pretty much a full a draft of the POP, full slideshow that I'm ready to walk through.
Sweet.
Screen share.
Yeah, do you want to do that? I might actually just, if it's all right, just quickly fill up my water bottle. I meant to do that before, so maybe while you're teeing that up, but if anyone else needs to maybe quickly, should we take a 2-minute break here just while Callum loads up? If anyone just needs to quickly grab a quick drink or something.
Hydration break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. Welcome back. That's a good. That's a good image, Callum.
Yeah. For everyone's edification, while our volunteer presenters present, I'm going to clean my fountain pens.
Terrific. What we'll do as well, but Alex and I, is we'll time you. That should actually be somewhat easy now. It's a bit tricky sometimes in a class, but we'll be able to time you. And Callum, have you paced this out? Do you know if it goes to 10 minutes?
I'm ready to start whenever.
Nice. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you weren't there. I think we were just having half a conversation with you.
Sorry.
That's fine. I'm saying I said it's a really nice image you got here, and Alex has indicated that he'll be cleaning his fountain pens. But what we'll both do, of course, will be we'll be listening closely. I'll be taking some notes as well, and we'll give you some feedback. What was I asking? Oh yeah, have you paced this out yet? Have you timed this, or you're not quite sure?
Yeah, it comes out to around 11 to 12 minutes.
Cool. So it's theoretically 10 minutes. You can probably get away with 11 to 12, but we'll also then, maybe that's a good note because we'll see if there's anything that you could cut. Because, you know, if you can sort of be just as impactful in 9 minutes as you can in 11, you definitely go for 9. Without further ado, if everyone wants to mute themselves, I could do it as host, but it's a bit fiddly with the screen share. So, Callum, let me just pull up a timer here. Stopwatch. All right, now I might minimize. I'm not sure if the screen recording is going to have our faces here, so I'm going to minimize that in case that vanishes, so that all we've got is Callum here. All right, when you're ready, Callum.
Cool. All right. Rivers are the veins of the earth. They provide food and water for a variety of plants and animals, including humans. However, many of Australia's river systems are being polluted due to coal mine wastewater. This is a photo of the Bargo River, which shows coal mine wastewater from Tarmor Colliery entering the river. The wastewater is this cloudy, milky mixture entering the river from beyond this grass and mixing with the Bargo in the background here. So you may be wondering, how exactly does coal mine wastewater pollute rivers? This happens through the coal mining and washing process and is known as acid mine drainage. This occurs when sulfur and pyrite is exposed to air and water during the coal mining process, which oxidizes to create sulfuric acid. This then dissolves and mobilizes the metals in the wastewater and the surrounding geology of the area. Some of the metals that can be leached from the surrounding rocks in the area include iron, nickel, zinc, barium, manganese, lithium, uranium, arsenic, as well as many more. This creates impacts for the water quality of a river, such as increased salinity, decreased pH to more acidic conditions, as well as increasing the concentrations of the metals I just talked about. As well as impacts on the water quality, coal mine wastewater also has impacts on the river biology. However, the ecological impacts of coal mine wastewater on Australian rivers have not been researched thoroughly. There is rich literature in the USA, including a meta-analysis, which has shown a 32% reduction in the richness across all taxa of fish, macroinvertebrates, and salamanders, as well as a 53% reduction in their abundances across all taxa when comparing polluted sites versus non-polluted sites. Some ecological studies have been done in Australia, such as a study in the Wollongabie River in the Blue Mountains area of New South Wales, Australia, which found the bioaccumulation of metals in a predatory beetle. This is 2 graphs from that study showing the accumulation of nickel and uranium in an aquatic beetle across reference sites, Bell and W1, across impacted sites, W3 and W5. Looking at this graph for nickel in the aquatic beetle, in the reference sites Bell and W1, we see very low concentrations of nickel, and at our impacted sites by coal mine wastewater, we have high concentrations of nickel accumulating in the beetle's tissues. A similar relationship is seen for uranium in the aquatic beetle, with low concentrations in the unpolluted reference sites, Bell and W1, and high concentrations seen in the impacted sites, W3 and W5. So understanding that coal mine wastewater has impacts on both water quality and the life in a river, my research project is focused around 4 research questions. The first question is, what are the water quality changes in the Bargo and Nepean rivers due to coal mine wastewater? The second question has to do with the ecological impacts of wastewater on the Bargo River. So what are the macroinvertebrate community changes in the Bargo and Nepean rivers due to coal mine wastewater? The third question is, how far downstream do the potential water quality and macroinvertebrate impacts stretch? Do these pollution impacts stretch into the Nepean River? And the fourth question is, what are the key ecologically hazardous pollutants in the coal mine wastewater? To answer these questions, my research project is framed around methods focusing on 8 sampling sites along the Bargo and Nepean rivers, and a suite of physiochemical variables would be measured, such as pH, turbidity, and many more. So water quality will be determined, as well as the macroinvertebrate community to determine ecological impact. I will conduct 5 sampling rounds for water quality variables and 1 sampling round for macroinvertebrate samples, and 5 replicates will be taken for each variable. This is a map of the sampling area quite close by to the township of Tarmore. Simek Coal Tarmore is the coal mine that is discharging to the Bargo River. Our first site, TDP, Tarmore Discharge Point, is where wastewater from the mine comes out and enters Tea Tree Hollow, the second sampling point, TTH. The wastewater then flows down Tea Tree Hollow and enters the Bargo River. Bargo River upstream, is our reference site for the Bargo River, and this will give us an idea of water quality before coal mine wastewater enters the river. BDS, Bargo downstream, is our impacted site, and this will give us an understanding of water quality after wastewater has entered and mixed into the Bargo River. Following the Bargo River downstream, the next sampling site is BRK, Bargo Rockford Reserve. This is a sampling site of importance as it is a popular recreational swimming spot, as so is Mermaid's Pool. Following the Bargo River even further downstream, we get to Bun, Bargo Upper Nepean, which will give us an idea of water quality of the Bargo River before it enters the Nepean River. NUS, Nepean River upstream, serves as our reference site for the Nepean River and will let us understand water quality before the wastewater from Bargo River enters the Nepean. NDS, Nepean River downstream, serves as our impacted site and will let us understand water quality in the Nepean after wastewater has flowed from Bargo River into the Nepean. Water quality will be determined at each site. This includes a suite of physiochemical variables such as pH, electrical conductivity or salinity, how salty the water is, dissolved oxygen, temperature, turbidity or how murky the water is, nitrogen, and a whole suite of metals, some including nickel, zinc, barium, arsenic, uranium, lithium, aluminium, and many others. Macroinvertebrates will be sampled using a standardized method. An aquatic net is placed into the stream and the bedrock is stirred for 30 seconds in a 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter area. The same habitat type will be used at each site, which is a bedrock riffle zone, as you can see from this image. The macroinvertebrate samples will be stored in ethanol and identified to family level at the laboratory under a stereo microscope. The EPT index will be used for macroinvertebrates, which is the Ephemoptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera index, which is used to determine the ecological impact by using pollution-sensitive taxa, known as mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. So far, some initial results have been collected from the unit experimental design and analysis, and so far we've found negative impacts to water quality in both the Bargo and Nepean rivers due to the coal mine wastewater from Tarmore Colliery. The main pollutants that we've found so far are salinity, nickel, and nitrogen. The macroinvertebrate results are still in process. This is a graph of nickel across our 8 sites along the Bargo and Nepean rivers in comparison to the Australian and New Zealand water quality guidelines, which recommend nickel to be at a concentration of 11 micrograms per litre for the survival of 99% of aquatic life. Our reference site, Bargo upstream, observes very low levels of nickel, and the discharge point, Tarmore discharge point, contains extremely high levels of nickel, well above the ANZ guideline limits. This then flows into Tea Tree Hollow, which also has high concentrations of nickel, and enters the Bargo River here at Bargo River downstream. Comparing BUS and BDS, you can see a sharp increase in nickel concentration due to the coal mine wastewater flow. This effect persists downstream, but is diluted as metals fall into the sediment, so less nickel is seen at Bargo Rockford Reserve, which is the recreational swimming area. Bun is the Bargo River before it enters the Nepean River, and it has less of nickel concentration, but still very high levels above the guidelines. Nepean River upstream is our reference site for the Nepean River, which has very low concentrations of nickel, which then shoot up as the Bargo River enters the Nepean, with the Nepean River downstream site having high concentrations of nickel. A similar pollution relationship is seen for nitrogen in the Bargo and Nepean rivers, with low concentrations seen in the Bargo and Nepean reference sites, and levels shooting up into the Bargo downstream site and Nepean downstream site after the wastewater enters those river systems. And the ANZAC guideline limits for nitrogen in rivers for the survival of aquatic organisms is 0.5 megagrams per litre, and the coal mine discharge comes in at maybe 2.4 megagrams per litre. This is what happens in a river due to excessive nitrogen loads. It promotes the growth of algae in a stream, and this can completely dominate coverage. In this photo, as you can see, the algae has pretty much covered all of the stream. This is another photo of algal growth in the Bargo River, which was taken near the Bargo Upper Nepean Bun sampling site. And seeing this growth of algae in the river has prompted some further research ideas, such as what are the ecological impacts in terms of algae? So how does the coverage in the stream compare upstream in the reference site versus downstream where it's been impacted by wastewater? We want to further investigate the bioaccumulation of metals in the algae. We want to look at what concentrations of metals are being taken up and what metals are being taken up. We want to also investigate the bioaccumulation of metals in biota, such as macroinvertebrates. So which metals are they taking up and in what concentrations? For the conclusion, this research will become one of the few studies to investigate the ecological impact of coal mine wastewater on an Australian river. So far, some initial results showed water quality impacts on the Bargo and Nepean rivers. However, this is only for water quality, and further research needs to be done focusing on the ecological impacts from coal mine wastewater. Ultimately, this research aims to promote the development of treatment and remediation strategies to decrease pollution in the Bargo and Nepean rivers. These are my references. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments, feedback? Thank you for listening.
Nice work.
Thanks. Thank you. Should I stop sharing my screen?
No,
Yeah,
leave,
I guess so.
leave it up. Sorry, I was just.
Oh, yeah, no, actually leave it up. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah, in case I need to switch back to slides.
Yeah, and but so very first note before anything, just while we're here, at the very least you should combine questions with the reference slide. Like, it doesn't help to say there's my references in 1 second. Like,
Yeah.
you have the, like, what you can also say is full references are available in my proposal. You know, you could even do select references here potentially, and something like this. But that's the first little note. Just while we're there, quickly, that was about 12 minutes, 11:45. So you need to cut it down a little bit. And I think at the end, there's definitely space. But before we even get to that, really great job overall, really thoroughly prepared, looked nice and professional, nice logical sequence. I think there's some ways you can tighten it, but they all go to sort of improving this, sort of improving what you've got, not sort of really changing the approach. It was my feeling. But Alex, do you want to kick off with some first bits of feedback? I've got a whole bunch of notes, well, half a dozen notes here, but have you got any notes?
Yeah, so one of the first things that I want to note is you use visualizations really well. And you use them really well rhetorically, as in to make the points that you're trying to make, to land the points that you're trying to make. So that's really great to see. You know, I thought you had a somewhat poetic start, but it turned out really well because what you were doing was setting up the problem. Like you were talking about the importance of rivers, and that because you then touched on, you know, I was just going over this with my son who's in year 4 the other day about the way we tell stories. and the way you introduce characters early in the story, even if they don't do anything early in the story. And so the way that you introduced the importance of rivers, you then touched upon in terms of your methodological design, for example, where you selected sites based on the way humans and non-human animals use the river. So you chose a recreational site, for example.
And
that's a great callback to your opening, which is about why humans use rivers.
Just very briefly on the opening, the fact the first word of the proposal was rivers. Like that was really powerful. Like that would be really effective in writing and works really well here as a priming the audience, priming the reader.
What are we talking about? We're talking about rivers.
Yeah, and it was good enough that it actually didn't even need hi everyone, welcome, thanks for being here. Like the fact that you just started, that actually worked. Like it's not what you could do at the end. I can't even remember if you did because I was scribbling a bunch of stuff, but sort of on this slide, you could be sort of like have thank you for listening, any questions, and then some select references underneath, for instance, because like think right now, as people are chatting, all they can see is this phrase questions. But if you have a more interesting like sitting slide at the end, like much better approach there.
One of the first question I wrote down was, why is the cloudy water bad? So like that image is such a great image to visualize the problem, like that's the fundamental problem that you're dealing with, or at least the cause of the problem, that one, that you've got water A going into water B, and you're asking, is water B a problem? Is water A a problem? And you're visualizing it with that terrific image with the cloudiness, and everyone looking straight away is going to go, ooh, that's bad. But the researcher in me straight away was like, you need to say what's bad about this quicker. You got to it about a minute or so later, explaining like the heavy metals and other things. But I noted it as a kind of as a question to ask you. Is like,
it would only take a tiny flourish to do it.
It's only a tiny thing to change,
Yeah.
It's almost explaining like what we're looking at in the image, like the cloudiness is caused by, is the issue to do with turbidity, and
what we know already is that this kind of runoff is likely to have some pretty detrimental environmental impacts, and the initial results we've got suggest that as well. And this is the kind of just a tiny little diversion from I don't know if you were reading a script. Were you reading a script?
No, I was just speaking. Okay,
good, because it's like that's sort of a it had the feel of a well-read script in a way. It sounded like you sort of knew what you were really you knew where you were going at every next step, so that's impressive. You could drop in one or two slightly conversational asides, so that tone you had was good, but you could go, and this kind of order here, it's really like, we know that that's not good. You've got to be a bit careful, and don't want to obviously presume your results, but you know enough to know that it's bad. So yeah, I also had a note. No, you go, Alex.
Oh, sorry. One other question that I noted, but I feel like you probably answered it, but it still came up for me while I was watching, was why aren't you measuring at Mermaid's Pool?
That's a good question. And if I go back to this, this is Mermaid Pools here in my beginning slide. The only way to get into the pool is to jump. It's very rocky.
I can see the rope on the
track. Yes. This spot here is the normal jump spot, I guess. I got to this point, I took this photo from walking along the top of this ridge. So yeah, we thought sampling at Rockford Reserve, which is before Mermaid Pools, if I go to my map, would give us an idea of the water quality roughly at the pool. Like it would be similar.
Yep.
We're looking at the Bun site as well, so we can compare these two sites. So
yep.
If I go to my results.
The reason why I asked the question is because of the way you articulated it, and rightfully. Can you go back to the map? Because you said, what was it? Bargo Rockford was a recreational area. And you said something like much like Mermaid's Pool is, very popular or something like that. And so instantly in my mind, I was like, well, they're equivalent. And I now know why you're not measuring both of them. But if you can just, again, it's probably just a little flourish, just a little kind of, You could even say Mermaid's Pool is more difficult to get to, and we feel like by measuring BRK and BUN, we'll cover it, you know.
And while we're talking about those areas, I actually thought the point about recreational swimming was under sort of developed, in the sense that it's you could sort of get what language am I looking for here? You could, especially in the impact, when you're sort of finishing with impact, you could talk about the importance of this kind of analysis as well, like the social impacts of this kind of work, not just the environmental ones, but you know, it's really we obviously know that it's important to be out and healthy to be out in nature, and we want clean natural surrounds, and these are recreational areas, and especially if people are using them, there's health risks. That's you know, so we're mitigating a risk, and by mitigating it, we're actually providing something really, you know, it's either kind of awful or good, like, or really good. One of those recreational places, like it's either not really swimmable or it's delightful. So like, it really doesn't need to be much, but given again that you're sort of dealing with recreational sites, it just struck me that sort of that wasn't mentioned at all. My big note for you though is that I think at the start, you didn't say, unless I missed it, you didn't say my project until about 3 minutes 15.
Okay.
So it's kind of clear in the sense that the audience has, you know, at least the panel has the paper. But remember that if you're presenting live, we didn't actually ask this as well. Do you know whether you're presenting like recording or presenting live to a panel or live to?
My one's going to be a pre-recorded presentation, but I have to be in live for the questions session.
Yep. So it's just a good idea to kind of say that you start with your rivers opening. You sort of, rivers important, pollution, how do they get polluted? That was the sort of opening run that was really good. And then my next note was, but where's the project? And all you need to say is something tiny, like, you know, the project, maybe even when you, I mean, it's a way to unite the cloudy water piece of feedback as well, because that's like the second sort of slide that comes up. Then you could mention that looking at, this is water A entering water B, and my project is looking at the impacts of water A, which we know is likely to have some pretty detrimental impacts or whatever. That's all it takes, just a tiny little thing. Another note while we've got this slide up is and it relates to that other slide as well. In both of these, you use the mouse to navigate.
Yeah.
This is really effective, this visual, I should say. Like, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense at all to look at it, but as soon as you walk us through, it makes perfect sense how all of these flows work. What I recommend though is not relying on your mouse, but actually just taking a little bit of time to add in arrows that go places. Use the animation fade in so that the slide doesn't change. You can just, each tap will just add a new arrow. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, I've done it before.
You know, because then you'd have like the flow map, and that would be much clearer. Like each step would stay up. You know, keep the arrows up. Probably find a way to do it that's like clear but not too visually cluttered. Like sort of same with the cloudy water. Like you could do an arrow that draws the audience's eye, either a curved arrow or a straight arrow, whatever. Play around, see what looks nice, and put a little text bubble that says that, you know, cloudy water contaminated. Mine runoff water or whatever, but like those that's a lot safer than using your mouse, because like at first I was like, oh, is that Callum's mouse? Oh, I get, like, whereas arrows just right there, really helpful.
That's good. Thanks for that.
As a content question, you've got 4 research questions.
Yes.
Are these going to be is this going to be, say, 4 separate chapters in the thesis? Is that how you can, or are these going to, like, I'm sort of interested in how these overlap, and if, you know, could you only do 3 and the results would be like, why do you need to do 4 versus 3? PS 4 is missing a colon.
Okay.
The numeral 4.
They can overlap in some ways, but I want to keep them fairly separate, especially the water quality versus ecological impacts, because that's sort of 2 sides. It's like the water chemistry versus the biology impacts on the river. But 3 and 4 are pretty separate. So how far does the pollution go? We wanted to map it into the Nepean River. That's a pretty key finding, because we're finding that it's not only impacting 1 river system, but 2. And the 4th question, that's sort of a side question. I probably didn't need to include it in this slide,
So
That's
what?
sort of something that can be included later on.
So how you could handle this then is you could frame 1 and 2 as your primary research questions. And then you could kind of have, you could even, and they could be bolded and in slightly larger font. And then you could have like adjacent research questions, or like, I don't know what the language might be, but a kind of, additional, like related research questions.
So like a primary and secondary sort of thing.
Yeah, like if that's as you've described it there, that's sort of what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, that's interesting now. I'm glad I asked that, because there's no sense that they weighted unevenly from the proposal you gave. It's just four research questions, whereas you've just articulated it quite differently, that 1 and 2 are much more important.
Yeah.
So also they're much more sort of primary, maybe not more important, but they're kind of more central.
So 1 and 2, I'll be expanding on a lot in my thesis, but 3 and 4 are sort of just a little side notes, like this is how far the pollution goes, and these are the key pollutants.
So yeah, and you could say this will lead to further questions such as this. I mean, then you've got to think about how that relates to go to the research ideas slide. This was I think the first place. Oh, we'll have to come back to these actually as well. But this was the second place where I was like, nah, that everything was so good, but this was like research ideas isn't the right phrase there. You want to have something. You want to have something like further research directions. And you probably need to be a touch clearer that like, okay, I'm doing this delimited set of stuff in the scope of an MRes project, but it's going to lead, like there are some things that we might be able to ask depending on what sort of data we get and how much I'm able to do. And there are other things that are clearly beyond the scope of the project. So you need to signal. This could then go to impact as well, because that goes to disciplinary impact, because it's like either you or someone else might pursue these further research directions. So you could probably link the further directions with your kind of impact, framing it to sort of wrap this up about, again, like why is the project important. And I've got 2 other notes just quickly. If you go back a slide or 2 to the nickel and the was it nitrogen or?
Yeah, nickel and nitrogen.
This took too long because it was kind of the same walkthrough as the map, and give it like what you could at the very least do is combine the 2 into one graph, because it was effectively the same thing in both graphs. Like it's not like in that you have the baselines are nice and clean, and all the other pickup points show dangerous levels of contamination. And yeah, that's the easiest place to cut out 2 minutes or something from this cut, like get it down to 10.
Yeah, for sure.
And my final note was also that the final slide conclusion is, like research ideas, not the right phrasing, not the right word. You're sort of doing the impact and significance thing here.
Yeah, it's a bit of aims, bit of outcomes, bit of impact.
Yep.
Yeah, you could maybe that aims, outcome, impact with separated by pipes or something. Just so like change it up, so then you can go through these. I would also I feel like you could do a touch more about why this matters to society. Like you're sort of assuming, you're doing that thing where it's implied that poor river quality and like poor marine life, marine biology, is detrimental for us somehow, but you don't really emphasize that. And you could
trying to complete the point that you bring up at the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
You touch on in your methods by choosing a site that is a recreation ground, and then you land it here.
Yes.
Like, are there any food? Like, is it only like what are the? Is it the? It's like I don't have a proper sense yet of the ecological cascade effects here from what you've presented so far.
Yeah, that's a big area for future research, as not much has been done. So, for example, we don't know if water from the Nepean or Bargo rivers is being taken up through irrigation and used to water crops. If this is happening, are metals going into the crops, and are we eating the crops and bioaccumulating metals in our own bodies?
Dude, These like that's you could kind of maybe even rethink the ending here and really try and fuse together the sort of future directions with like why this kind of work matters. Like, because future directions is where you can suggest all of the potential you can kind of capture the importance to society by linking to questions that are clearly things we need to know more about, which is future research directions. It's disciplinary impact, it's social impact, and it's a lot neater than this kind of slightly fragmented ending. It would be a lot more forceful, I think. Put that in people's mind. I mean, remember that you're listening to a panel of humans, and we don't remember big details. We remember the gist of stories, and so it's very likely if you at the end ask that question, like, are these contaminants winding up in the water that we're irrigating our food supplies with? Like, that's a scary thought that everyone should be concerned about. Appeal to human emotion. Give a sense of urgency. You as the steward, you as the leader, like, people need to be caring about this more. You can, you have a professional level of urgency about this. You want to give people a kind of an emotional level of urgency about it too.
Those are some really good points. Thanks for that.
Anyone else got questions?
Yeah. A couple of positive comments. Caitlin and Chet saying well done. I think everyone agrees that was a really impressive performance. I reckon a few people are kind of horrified now. They're like, oh crap, I've got to do something like this. So
Thank you,
yeah,
Caitlin and Chet.
Does anyone have any questions or like comments, or was anything unclear to you as sort of a naive audience member? I actually wondered about sediment. Given that you said things sink to sediment, you should probably you said something about other catchment areas. Probably mention sediment measurement as a future research direction.
Yeah, definitely need to mention that. That's something that we're actually talking about looking into.
Yeah. Good. You have set the bar very high. Yeah. You have, Callum. That's good. That's excellent.
I have, I don't know, like little question, I guess. With the bar graphs, did you take like multiple readings at each site?
Yes. If I go back to them, I don't mention it in my figure captions, but I do mention it in my methods that 5 replicates for each variable were taken, and that's at every sampling visit. So times 5 by 5 for each sampling round. We're still conducting the sampling rounds. This data is only based on 2 sampling rounds, so there's 10 measurements for nickel at each site.
Right.
Same with nitrogen.
Oh, cool.
Great question, Drew, and good note for you, Callum, to maybe like preempt that and remind, like 4 slides on in an interesting presentation, like reader might, or the viewer might not remember, and make that link, so you could just be a little clearer about that.
Have you considered putting like error bars on the bar graph?
Yeah, that's something that I'll definitely do. We're still working on these graphs. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to change around in the graphs is potentially the green and red. I don't know, there's just like a colorblind issue sort of thing. We did do that because green is good under the recommended guideline limits and red is bad above the...
It makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
And are they the same scale, the two, like the milligram per liter scale? Like, can you merge these graphs? Or
I think it would make it a bit messy. That's why
I wanted. You might have to decide on one, because it does get a bit repetitive.
Yeah, I will definitely do a lot of playing around with the graphs and try to figure out what works. I initially had 4 graphs, like for uranium, arsenic, and zinc, but my presentation was coming out to 18 minutes. So I cut back on those metals, and I definitely feel like I need to play around with these graphs to cut my time down to 10.
So here's a kill your darlings moment as well. I think for the purpose of the point you're conveying, doing either nitrogen or sorry, what was the other one? I've forgotten.
Nickel.
Nickel. Either one, like you make the point, like adding a second one for the audience, it really doesn't, it doesn't like, oh, wow, that even more further enhances like the argument's pretty well made, especially if you can say, and we basically see similar patterns for nitrogen, uranium, and whatever else. Like, you know, it's one of those things where you feel as the author that the information must be communicated. But I really, given that you need to find something to cut, if you didn't need to cut, if it was a 15-minute presentation, no problem. But you want to try and keep it to 10, and it doesn't. Everything else is adding more than having 2 of these. Is Alex? Do you agree?
Mute there, sorry. Don't know what was going on there. Yeah, like Jack's main point that you're a minute and a half ish over, and if you need to stick to 10 minutes, you've got to cut something, and that's an obvious kind of thing that you can cut. As in one of these 2 slides, it's obvious, because all of the other slides are pretty high impact, and you speak to them well, and they illustrate what you're trying to illustrate. But Jack's point is good. That these 2 things make the same point. That is, you know, upstream good, downstream bad, essentially.
Yep.
And so it's either the case that you keep them both, but you skip through them very quickly, or you could cut one. And it's probably that you would cut one, because skipping through kind of isn't really what you want to do.
Unless you can.
The thing that you want to do is kind of concentrate on it. And the way that you explained, like at this point we see this, and then at this point we see that, and then this other point we see, you know, you explained the kind of changes really well. So you want to just concentrate on developing the points there, and skipping slides isn't kind of going to be useful for you. On the topic of color, I would say that green good, red bad is a wise choice. Good for colorblind, I think, as well. But you might go for different shades in the end. It's the kind of thing that if it were me, and if I had like, you know, and if I had a couple of hours on a Sunday night before the presentation kind of thing, I'd sit down and I'd go through maybe the New South Wales Environmental Protection Agency and see if they have a colophon or a style guide, and see if they had declared hex codes for their colors, and I would just kind of borrow from those. That'd be the kind of thing I'd do. I'd probably, if it were me, I'd probably also gray the background to the graphs to distinguish them a little bit. That's just an aesthetic choice, you know, that I probably inherit from using R more than anything kind of for realsies.
I think it'd probably be too much work, but I wonder if you could somehow actually use the map, because the map, I think it'd be really, I'm sure you could, but I think it'd get pretty weird and convoluted to be out. Like the bar graph represents information in a way that's very handy for what you want to communicate there. That would be like, you know, unless you had like red dots and green dots to represent like visually upstream good, downstream bad.
Yeah, you could do a faceted graph and then export the faceted graph onto this map so that you popped up a little faceted graph at each measuring point. But that's probably too much labor for the point that you're trying to make here. You know, you're just trying to make the upstream good, downstream bad point. That's essentially what you're trying to do.
For a conference or something in future, work on that though, because if you can have a really good visual aid, it just helps people understand. You explained it well, and it makes enough sense that I can absolutely read that graph as representing this landscape. But you could put the data onto the landscape even more prominently. But yeah, it's not necessary for now. It's just kind of we're thinking.
Yeah, that's a great idea to think about. That'd be very cool to incorporate both the graphs and the map.
Yep. And, you know, maybe like poster as well would be the same. Maybe if you, I'm sure you'll be kind of getting a lot of mileage out of this material. So, yeah. Well, thanks. That was a great question from Drew, because that really got us going.
Thanks, Drew.
Any other observations or questions, Drew, or anyone else?
No, I think it looks pretty good. Like that map is really cool, and I like that the graphs sort of show that relationship between distance from discharge point and how the level kind of decreases, and then all that stuff. But yeah, it's a good presentation.
And I noticed that you're using some Blue Lab equipment. You looked at the the Blue Lab pH meter. I've just been, I'm one of those people that's been gardening a lot more because of the lockdown. So I've been getting heaps into my sort of amateur gardening science. And I've been kind of really eyeing off one of those fancy pH meters. Are they good?
Yeah, they're very good. They're very expensive, I believe.
Yeah.
So, but that's a great thing to get into, that whole realm of gardening and figuring out pH of your soil and all of that.
And what about, how do you measure electrical conductivity?
It's in the same meter. It does both pH and electrical conductivity.
Oh, cool.
This meter next to it does temperature and dissolved oxygen. And this machine over here does turbidity.
And is turbidity defined as the like number of molecules that aren't water in
dissolved solids in the water? Yeah,
solids, right.
Total dissolved solids. So it's measured in TDS, total dissolved solids.
Right. Cool. Well, I'll be hitting you up maybe for some more product advice when as my hobby escalates.
That's good.
So, all right. Well, that's terrific stuff from Callum. And a good, I think you can all see there that Callum had some. That was a longer version of the kind of Q&A that you'd have in the actual POP. But you can see how some of that was, like Drew's question, great example. How did you do, what's behind that? How did you do X? Or what are your assumptions here? And then, oh, okay, thanks for asking. Here's the answer. That sort of, I don't know, that mode, that note, that theme, that tone, it's good. So, next cab off the rank was Hasto. Chris, how are you going?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks.
Yep. How prepared are you in the sense? What have you got? Something? Have you got a full draft here? Have you got a partial draft? Have you timed yourself?
Yeah, similar to what we just saw.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Well, I guess if you want to do a bit of a screen share, what we'll do is we'll do your one now, Chris, and then we'll take a short break after that, and then we'll come back for final questions and whatever else people want to ask.
Is this working, right?
Yeah, that works. My first note, even before we get going, is that you'll probably want to flip these around. You want to put the title of the project as the big prominent text. And then, and actually, this is something Callum meant to say to yours as well. Chris, you should put on here the Christopher Hastis, School of Social Sciences, RD2 2021H.
Yep.
Just maybe underneath the picture, just a tiny little thing. But just, and for you, Callum, HIE was missing. Would be good to would be good to put there.
School of Science.
Oh, sorry, School of Science. Yeah. So yeah, didn't mean to preempt you there, Chris. I'm going to turn off the tile here in case it's showing the recording. So, Chris, take it away whenever you're ready.
So hello, I'm going to speak to you about my research topic I've been working on for the past 2 semesters under the guidance of my supervisor. It's, as you can see, I'll be exploring the emancipatory potential of online video gaming for people with physical disabilities and their offline life world. So I chose this image here as I wanted to show that there's different experiences for people with disability, not just the dominant discourses that might show some sort of inferiority. So I wanted to show that first. So my personal story was very much the focal point of exploring this avenue of research. I began my university journey in 2010 with a Bachelor of Business and Commerce at Western Sydney University. I received mostly credits during that time. After completing 2/3 of my course, I started to feel a great level of anxiety. Depression and anxiety had overcome me and I discontinued my study. At that point, I went on to play competitive video games daily for the next 3 years. Video games provided me with an avenue to speak to people and show how people can perceive me when my disability wasn't the focal point in a conversational interaction. I was involved in a team where we would all have a specific role and we competed in tournaments. This experience showed me what it felt like to not feel oppressed by my disability. Towards the end of that period, I decided to reapply and complete my degree in the second half of 2015. I finished the last 8 subjects and successfully graduated with a credit average. In the second half of 2016, I started a Bachelor of Social Science. In 2017, I received the Dean's Merit List Award. And that was only improved by in 2018, I received the Dean's Medal, as you can see in this image here. So this was to show the juxtaposition of what can change over time. As now I'm in the second semester of Master of Research, obviously, and as well as I'm working my first part-time job. So as I explained this story to my supervisor, Irina, she immediately identified something interesting in the way video games may have had some sort of impact in my life that led me to where I was. So here's the beginning. So this is the background information. Since the emergence of disability studies in the 1970s, there's been a critical orientation centered on emancipation throughout that time. There was an emphasis on people with a disability providing their authentic voice in academia. Within disability studies, one of the first problematic assumptions of disability arose through the biomedical health approach, which sees disability as being deficient and deviant. So Irving Zola, as we can see here, was a medical sociologist who looked at disability through a different lens other than the biomedical model. He provided space for oppressed voices of disability. Zola introduced methods from the social sciences in disability studies, which was a much needed paradigm shift. So now I'm going to talk about the transhuman health paradigm, which is the theoretical framework that covers my research. Since at the core of transhumanity was a need for transcendence and emancipating beyond human limitation, using the transhuman health paradigm as a framework seemed to fit most appropriately. Using the transhuman health morality will show that since humans are all on the path to advancement, the default stage for all humans is imperfection and difference. People with a disability are among the most economically and socially excluded groups, with an imperative need to experience emancipation to overcome oppressive social dynamics. So borrowing from clinical psychology and disability studies, a parent may have a psycho-emotional restrictive influence by suggesting their child is too fragile to undertake a certain activity. A good example in my own life is my mother continually being overprotective and unsure if I'll be safe in certain social activities, even to this day, regardless of my level of independence. So the danger of social perceptions is the ability for the perception to become internalized. I've also experienced internalization, as I've been fearful that I'm not socially legitimized in certain activities to show my autonomy, which highlights the inferior perceptions I may have internalized. Infantilization is conceptualized as overprotective parents towards their children, which is grounded within the hegemonic discourse of inferiority, as I've explained in the previous example. Infantilization has the impact of lowered self-worth, simultaneously impeding the social development of people with a disability. So emancipation provides a counter to these oppressive forces by promoting autonomy and self-confidence. So in talking about the online versus offline nexus, which is the site where my research will take place, a life world relates to how someone subjectively constructs the world they experience. The online versus offline discourse focuses on what is considered real or non-real. The online space is not considered to have the same properties as the offline life world, including a local, embodied, and physical space. So with video games have become a normalized online activity for young people around the world. There is a freedom from parental surveillance, which is an opportunity for people with a disability to have a high level of independence. Online avatars also offer the opportunity for people with a disability to gain a sense of accomplishment and achievement through achieving activities they may not be able to achieve in the offline world. Video games also offer someone the ability to socially construct an online identity. So then, is it then possible that these gaming experiences can lead to online emancipation, which can then be reconciled in an offline life world? As a result of the background and literature review, this is what the research question comes out, as we can see on the slide. So with the approach and methodology, the proposed methodology for this project is multi-method, combining online ethnography with an autoethnography, while also interviewing participants online. The online ethnography for this project will occur within online video games such as the Call of Duty franchise. Online interviews will take place via an app called Zoom, which we're using here. The primary focus of data collection through the questions is to understand whether people with a disability have experienced emancipation in an online setting through video games, and whether there has been a feeling of emancipation in their offline life world. Autoethnography is another method used for the purposes of this project. An evocative storytelling approach will be used for this research project, as I, the researcher, have personal experience with online multiplayer video games to analyze the emancipatory effect of video games for people with a disability. In terms of the ethical concerns, consent for online interviews will be both informed and voluntary. As I myself have a physical disability, the participants of the online interviews can feel assured of my cultural understanding. A collaborative approach will be utilized to ensure working together rather than the process of extracting information. So an impact statement. At the beginning, I talked about some statistics about the vastness of disability across the world to show how many people obviously have a disability, and Australia as well. So it is hoped that disability advocacy groups such as Muscular Dystrophy New South Wales, which I now work at, can use the knowledge from this project to promote the need to implement video gaming related supports in NDIS plans, which is plans that help support people with a disability through their daily lives. As I mentioned earlier, I've competed in online gaming. So this photo is an image of when I actually met 3 people that I gamed with for a few years, and I actually met them for the first time in real life. So this signified to me how video games showed my personal growth, as well as the social connection of video gaming, as well as highlighting the offline versus online nexus, where you can play online, but then you can also meet in person. So I want to show that. So here is my timeline of how I've conducted activities throughout this semester, which I've incorporated as obviously the most important is the important dates at the end. That is just my reference list, and I have questions for people now. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Nice work,
one.
Chris. Just about 9 minutes 30 there. So you're actually, you're in a good space where what we can do is probably help you tighten up a little bit and beef up a few things, but you don't, you won't really need to, it's not like you have anything you'll need to cut, but you might swap some stuff out or might replace some of the discussion, because there might be, I feel like there's a couple of things you'll need to add. But Alex, do you want to kick off with some impressions and feedback?
The first couple are what Jack mentioned at the start, the flipping of the text, so that your title was the big text, was the first one.
Chris, sorry, do you just want to reshare while we're giving you these comments?
That's a good idea.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right.
But also, I thought because you spoke to the image, it'd also be nice if the image were larger as well. Just not necessarily so that it's easier for people to see what's there, because it's quite a good contrasty image. It's easy to see what's going on, but just to kind of represent that it's important, to increase its size relative to its importance. So the least important feature of that page is MRE's presentation of proposal. It gets the most emphasis. So yeah, I'd make the other 2 elements bigger. The main note that I have about, I think at least for the start of your presentation, is that it really began when you started talking about video games. And like my advice would be to lead with that, to start like, you know, you'd probably start like saying, you know, I dropped out of university in, what was it? 2012,
2012, yeah.
And became a competitive gamer. And then from, you know, you'd literally just start with that, because that's the point where you get straight to the, you get to the research problem much more quickly that way. Yeah, I felt that you could probably on that point cut down a little bit of your biographical information, not because it's irrelevant, but because it takes attention away from the research problem, which you're trying to kind of drive forward the research problem, and you're using, oh look, I've got ink on my hands, and you're using your biography to help illustrate the research problem. But I think you can cut the biographic the autobiographic stuff down and still have the research problem clear. And that means that you'll be able to give a bit more attention to the research as well. The other point that I wanted to mention is that a few of the kind of methodological / theoretical frameworks that you invoke probably could do with a little bit more attention in terms of describing what they imply for your research. Like transhumanism, for example, you kind of bring up transhumanism, but I felt like I felt like it wasn't fully explained for the purposes of understanding why it was there, as a point of thinking about a design of research for a project. Yeah, but really solid presentation. I actually think the biographical, kind of like Callum's point about bookending stuff, the biographical element to this presentation is really important because you're choosing autoethnography as one of your methods here. That, as you say, that helps to validate the research that you're doing, but also gives you some interesting access points in terms of the other data collection methods that you're going to choose about interviewing people and stuff like that, because you'll have less kind of outsider and gatekeeping problems than relative to others, for example. So that's a really important point, and I think it's great. But I think you could just bring the biographical information down a little bit at the start, at least.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, all right. So I've got maybe half a dozen notes here. I think only 2 or 3 of them are big. There's a couple of smaller ones. I will, obviously, aside from terrific draft, it's a really good, really, I agree, the personal story is really engaging, and I agree with Alex that it can be condensed even just a little bit. Sometimes if you take out 20-30 seconds of something, you remove the point at which the audience just kind of starts to wonder what's coming next. So it's not like we're saying cut it all out, but you can definitely trim it down. What the big thing that got me though is I realized it wasn't until about 5.5 minutes that you really talked about the project at all. Until that point, everything was kind of context and background. Like, so there was, and that, so what you need to do is, I had the same feedback for Callum. I think Callum took about 3 minutes 15 to get to project, you a little bit longer. So what needs to happen is that probably there's lots of ways to do it, but at the start of the opening slide, something like that, you can say, I want to be talking to you about a project that's, my project explores the emancipatory potential of video games for people like me. For people like me who have physical disability, and we'll come back to the title in a second because the "and" kind of gets me as well. But I'm not sure exactly how. I think maybe cutting it down, if you can cut down that first 5.5 minutes to sort of more like 4 minutes and have mentioned the project, because this ties with the other big piece of feedback I have for you though, which is I don't think video games are at all prominent enough here. Like there's no literature review really of I don't get a given how central games are here to the narrative and Like that's what you're looking, like gaming is the intervention, right? You're looking at the impact of this intervention on people's, the emancipatory aspects of the intervention, right? And so what we want also, you need to be really clear. I think we spoke about this a little with your abstract. You need to be really clear that you've got disability studies, which is quite well developed now. Like even in the sort of, even though there's new stuff with the transhumanist developments, which I agree, that was one of my notes. You need to introduce transhumanism a little more. But disability studies is fairly well established, but has had very little to do with anything about gaming. There's like increasing, like video games have been a cultural phenomenon for decades, and there's increasing kind of research, and culturally they're getting massive. You've got esports, you've got all this stuff, and there's increasing academic literature, but very little to no interface. That's really important for you to stress, because it's an important contribution, and it's also important to be able to show the panel that you've clocked, that you've kind of gone, yeah, look, I'm obviously not, like, I haven't read everything in all of these fields, but I know that we really have very little that intersects. And like there was a lot, the background is very heavy on the disability side of things and really doesn't help give much background into the video game side of things. So that's something I would kind of develop in the presentation, which might take a bit of thinking for how you what you want to add. You're not going to have a whole lot of time. You can definitely add a bit more. I also want to ask about the title here. Just if we do the exercise of taking the word seriously, it's fine for the start. Exploring the emancipatory potential of online video gaming for people with physical disabilities and their offline life world. It's the "and" that gets me, because technically or grammatically what it's saying is the emancipatory potential of games for, like, what I think you mean that as one clause for like people with physical disabilities and the world they inhabit outside of games. But it just reads a bit weirdly grammatically. Even if you flipped it around, exploring the emancipatory potential of online video gaming for the offline life world of people with physical disabilities. It might get a touch confusing, but given that you explain life world and you kind of go into online, offline, I think you could get away with that. But it just reads a little weirdly at the moment. So at 5 minutes 30, I said I don't know what the project is, and even if you skip down to your methodology slide there, number 5. Here I feel like this could be a little fuller somehow. Like I want to know what I presume you laid this out in the proposal, but I'd like, maybe I missed it because I was taking notes. But how many people are you planning? Like the online ethnography, it'd be good to sort of have on the slide here for people to kind of look at a brief indication.
That's a good idea.
Of the data. And what kind of weighting do these have? Is autoethnography a part of it, or is it central? It's probably not. It's, interviews and ethnography, that's already really big. They're two. I wouldn't be surprised if you only wind up with one of those. If you do them seriously. So, okay, to round this out just quickly, on the impact slide, I think you also need to, personally, I would probably change that to impact and significance. Like this right here isn't a statement. This is like, you're just having bullet points about the impact and the significance. I think you also need to really emphasize the point about the novelty of this project in mapping what is clearly a real world phenomenon that requires bringing two disparate disciplines together. I say it's recognized not just because of your story, but you've made me think of a podcast I heard recently that I'll see if I can dig up. It's about exactly what you said about a young man with physical disability who eventually died, and then his parents were really surprised when some people they had no idea rocked up to his funeral, and they were his gaming crew, and it was this beautiful. And his parents had no idea that he had this emancipated life online where he was free from his physical body. And it was like it was a really touching story, and it's exactly what you're describing in many ways. So you know, I'll see if I can find that, because you could even sort of cite that kind of anecdotal evidence. If there's no, you know, if there's no academic stuff on this already, then it's ripe because it's happening. Lots of people like you who are getting this benefit from gaming culture. It's a really profoundly important social phenomenon, given society's commitment to try and improve quality of life for people with disability. Here's a thing that, if you actually allow people to do it, massively, radically transforms quality of life. And like, it's a phenomenon that's not being studied. And there's lots of smart people studying like different parts of it, but no one's coming to get like that sense of like, why aren't we looking at this, is really missing from this pitch. So I think people will get that too, the audience. So I would really encourage you to ram that home.
Yep.
My final point is get rid of the Gantt chart, because if you're going to have anything, you'll need to have a chart. You want to have a timeline for the research year, not for the semester that you're at the end of. But it's a good note for everyone that you don't really need, the Gantt chart is probably not worth wasting any time on in the proposal, in the POP. People will ask you about that if they read the proposal document, but you can use some of those precious seconds to talk about something more of the background. And like with Callum, keep a final slide up. Don't skip over references. Keep them up as a lasting final slide. Whew, done. Sorry.
Thank you.
Caitlin, I'm going to go straight to you about any questions.
Why me? No, I've been following Chris since we shared a unit. I've been following his research really closely because I find it so interesting. I think it's really, I agree. I think it's really important. That was going to be kind of like, it's not my question, but my comment is that I'm with Jack. I think it's really significant in that I myself have been doing a lit review in the realm of its education of video games, but in terms of video game research, this is an area that I have not seen anything at all about. And I think that the value, I like the importance of what you're looking at could really be emphasized. I think it would make the presentation really powerful, which aside from the fact that I think this is an excellent presentation, I think that would just add that little bit more into it. My other question was about transhuman health paradigm. I'm not familiar with that, and I did find myself wanting to know more about it as you were going through. So I made a note that maybe you were saying that it's the framework that your research is. It's the framework that you're doing your research from. Is that right?
Yeah. It ties in everything that I'm doing. Yeah.
Maybe I was thinking maybe even like a separate slide kind of tying that in.
Definitely.
Because at the moment they all look like the same kind of relevance, but if this is what's kind of tying it all together, then maybe have that as a different slide. But
it's a good note. I thought that too. These 4 points, I only kind of understood them by the time you finally talked down to them. So good note, Caitlin.
And same with the literature review slide, and it just says video games.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know, like, because as you were talking through the oppressive dynamics and the internalization, which was all really excellent. I was kind of looking ahead and going like, what video games? But like what? So maybe just a little bit of an elaboration.
Yeah.
There, but that kind of ties back into what Jack was saying about just the emphasizing.
Maybe what you could do though is maybe you need to rethink that slide and the previous one. The background is like you have a literature, there's sort of both lit review background slides. One is on disability studies, one is on video games. That'd be much, much clearer, and that'd help to really emphasize these two disparate things. Like it's nice that you've got a lot, that these slides aren't crowded, but that also means you could kind of probably sneak in a little bit of the stuff that's on disability. Move even the research question to another slide, like after those two. Do one on disability studies, one on video game. Is it called video game studies? What's the discipline called? It's not like
digital gaming is
digital gaming.
But is it like digital gaming studies, or is it? I suppose you could just say digital gaming, but like you'd say disability studies, you'd probably say digital gaming studies if you had to.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be confused by that.
yeah. So yeah, that's, and then you can lead up to the research question, which you've already I like the fact that you kind of get to the research question in your personal story. This is really effective, a really effective thing to say the research question twice, once in the context of your biography, and then to kind of go, but like, so what's the actual background here? Well, we're dealing with two fields. Like that needs to be a leading note. It needs to be. Video gaming here is the central thing for you. So, and then you can walk through people through those two fields and then like formally state the research question and then kick off methodology, how you're going to do it. And then sort of here's why it's good. Here's why you should give me the green light, guys. But I mean, yeah, it's like, it's largely there. It's a bit of rearranging, a little bit more thinking. You've probably done, you know, a bunch of you probably know what you need to know, but it'll just take a bit of time now to add some more stuff in here.
Yeah, exactly.
Other thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, do you mind? I had a question as well.
Yeah.
Not to hog all the questions and all the presentations. But I was wondering, you mentioned a lot about like infantilization, things like that. And I'm wondering, as an impact of disability, I'm wondering if you've thought about maybe the differences of people who are born with disabilities versus who acquired it through maybe trauma and things, and whether maybe video games might help them like feel emancipated, or if there is even a difference between how they live their life.
That's a good methodological question as well. Like, is it how relevant is that, do you think, Chris?
It's actually a really good question. It didn't really cross my mind whether someone had like a pre-existing condition or somewhere along their life they became disabled in some way. So that is a very interesting question. I haven't actually thought about that until this point. So yeah.
Well,
Great. So great question, because that's also then, Chris, an example of something you want to give careful thought to as part of your ethics application and participant recruitment.
Yeah.
You know, what are the actual, when we say people with a disability, that's obviously a very, very wide field. Do you want people like who are like what are the threshold or criteria of disability that because you're going to need some kind of criteria.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe you decide you want to try and get 5 of each. People who've acquired, people who are like congenital disability versus acquired disability.
Yeah, definitely.
Or maybe one or the other. But great question, Drew.
Yeah, thank you.
All good. I was just thinking it, you know, I thought, I wonder if there's a difference, if there's, you know, that different lifestyle, if you know, whether it's acquired or it's born with it, if it makes a difference or not. But
it's a great question just as well, because it illustrates what happens when, I mean, this is what people on a panel will do. They'll just ask something that's a totally like reasonable, good, incisive question that you haven't actually thought about. And so, Chris, how you responded there is the kind of way to respond. You were just like, yeah, I haven't really thought about that, and I need to think about it more.
Exactly, yeah.
So any other questions? As we said, we'll take a break after this and come back for a bit of a final powwow. But any other questions or comments for Hasto?
Can I ask a question about your methods?
Yeah, sure.
When you're interviewing people, are you going to be interviewing people from a single gaming community or from different genres like role-playing games, strategy, that sort of thing?
It's what I wanted to know. Yeah, what's the detail? Like, what are you actually going to do?
The main criteria for me is that there's an online and multiplayer component, so that people are interacting with others. I'm not so interested in the exact game or genre. It's more so that there's interaction, because the whole point of this is that people are being emancipated through their interaction with others who don't know about their disability, essentially. So the video game in particular is not so essential. The reason I put Call of Duty as an example there is because that's the community that I was strongly a part of, but it isn't essential, I don't think, because of the fact that it's all about interaction and working with others in the game. So yeah.
That's although, yeah, great question as well, Callum, because again, Chris, that's perfectly reasonable. That's a really good, like, rationale to have, but you'll need to get a nice tight version of that, again, for ethics reasons, to kind of say, like, what, you can't just be like, we're going to go and pick people. You know, you might also need to stipulate people who fit this sort of broad disability criteria, who play a game that fits into these kind of criteria, you know, online, collaborative, team-based, anonymized, or, you know, largely so. And then probably also, like, how many hours a week? Is that a reasonable thing? Like, you know, people can self-nominate as, I feel a sense of belong. I will respond to this call for participants because, yes, I am a person who gets a sense of belonging out of games. But are you going to say minimum, you know, plays games minimum, like minimum average, say 10 hours a week per year, or, like, you know, to allow maybe some ups and downs, but someone who's like something like that?
Yeah, I need to figure out exactly, like you said, a limitation on how much they play per week to ascertain that. But the other interesting part about that is, what about someone who does experience, you know, this emancipation where all of a sudden they have no reason to want to be home and they want to be out and in society, so they just it could be a situation where they're not playing video games because they are feeling emancipated. So that's another thing.
Worked. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I don't think there needs to be a. You can ask that question out of interest, but I wouldn't think there would need to be a minimum, amount of time that you would need to hit. Because I think the way the emancipation happens via video games doesn't need those kind of. I think it doesn't need like a time limit placed on it.
Cool. So that next methodology question, probing into the details. How are you, the kind of thing ethics is going to want to know, how are you actually planning to recruit? Like, as in, are you going to be distributing a digital flyer on Facebook groups? Are you going to be able to utilize Steam or any of the gaming network? Like, these are the kind of details that, like, ideally in a really tight proposal, like, you are pitching the exact details of the project, which is what ethics will need. They will they need all those details. You can skate through here without full details and say that but if you don't have full details, I would preempt it and say, I'm still working through with my supervisor the precise details about who we're going to recruit, what our criteria are. And I'd love some feedback from the panel on that. If anyone has, invite the panel to comment.
Yeah.
But what are you planning? Like, have you thought that yet?
Yeah, I actually now work at Muscular Dystrophy in New South Wales. So I'm working at an organization where I can, if need be, like you said, place maybe an advertisement in the online newsletter that I could possibly use. I actually I participate in sporting events. So I know a lot of people from sport that I could call upon. I mean,
saying then Muscular Dystrophy New South Wales is a good example. You can say, like, recruitment will primarily take place through participation. You'll just kind of pretend, you'll assume the organizations are going to participate. So circulating calls for participation amongst networks, because that's, you'll need to get a letter from each of those organizations to say, yes, we will do that before ethics sign off on it. But you can, at least for the POP, say something like that. Like, all of these details really add up to show how much thought's gone into the project and allow the panel to assess whether it's viable. Because I feel like at the moment you've presented a absolutely terrific, like, topic, and there's not enough real detail about the project, either in terms of the background or the methodology.
Yep.
So a bit more of in the way of detail on both of those things is going to significantly improve this, I think.
Yep.
And maybe just while we're on this slide, ethical concerns down the bottom should almost be its own slide, or it's a bit weird to have it floating down the bottom there. You talked to it reasonably well, but just visually it looks a bit weird. But
my supervisor told me to only have 5 to 7 slides, so that's why I'm a bit light on the slides.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But I'm not sure how to. Otherwise maybe approach and methodology as a heading, and then ethical concerns, and then you actually itemize some ethical concerns. Informed consent, criteria, selection. and then come up with another one. And you can get rid of the Gantt chart slide, so you've got
Yeah,
one
that's
more-
that's
got
great.
one to
Yeah,
play with.
we'll do that. Yeah,
Hunky dory. Well, great work prepping that, Hasto.
thank you.
So you can stop sharing now. So where's everyone at? Like, we can take a break unless people are like, no, let's just do a few questions and call it a day. Like, it's 4 o'clock now.
I'd vote for a little break and then come back and have a chat. But what the hell do I know?
Yeah, sold to the director of the program. So yeah, all right. Let's say, should we say 10 past 4? Give ourselves a 10 or so minute break so people can go to the loo or whatever. Sweet. All right, we'll see you back at 10 past 4, everyone. I just realized I didn't hit pause. So anyone who's watching this video's hopefully got enough salve to be clicking forward, or is at least engaged in sort of doing this, watching this while doing the dishes or something. And it didn't matter that it was 10 minutes of silence. So yeah, Sarah's.
I decided to get inspired and look for Environmental Protection Agency style guides. Just because it intellectually interested me in terms of like, how would I program that in R to kind of bring up a photo of a map so that it'd be geolocated, but it's on an odd angle, it's not straight down, so I can't use a typical like mercurial projection, and then co-locate and then put some elements of a faceted graph on at various points in the map. I know I can do it, but I can't think of, I'm just kind of thinking it through at the moment. Anyway.
Callum, do you use R much or anything comparable?
No, I've used R before, but I'm not very good at it. But I want to learn.
Can I just say, like, I've done a little bit of dipping into R, and making graphs is one of the easiest things you can do in it. And because the way, especially if you're using ggplot, the way that it works, it's just designed to make nice looking things. So, you know, for instance, the graphs you made of the zinc and the nickel and the nitrogen stuff, you can do them and they just come out looking really pro and slick, just without anything as the default. And then once you've got the hang of that, I'm sure it wouldn't be much of a leap to do what Alex is talking about.
Yeah, it's definitely a good rabbit hole to go down. And you can do some really, like what you were saying, Alex, sounds like really awesome stuff to spend some time and focus on.
So the entryway to the rabbit hole that I just went down is the Environmental Protection Agency in the US. And what did I Google? EPA New South Wales style guide, and the first hit was the US EPA, and so I thought, oh, I'll click on that. And it's got a checklist for product development, which 9 steps to publication is their only bullet point. And it's got a writing guide, and so I clicked on the writing guide, and the last bullet point in the writing guide for the headings is, you'll like this, Jack, the substance of style. So I was like, cool, the substance of style, let's click on that. Any EPA product must communicate something about the agency as a whole, something on the list of our essential qualities. At the top of such a list, these should be, and then it like goes into it. I was like, wow, that's an awesome way to kind of, you know, this is not a small organization or anything. And they're just saying, like, when you're writing for the whole agency. Word, like, yes, words matter. Yeah, and it's not a small page either. It's a huge like guide, as I suppose it must be, because it's a big agency. They've got to have a.
Assuming it.
Here's their bit on subjunctive verb. The subjunctive has its place, but like all communication, must mean something that actually means something.
The subjunctive verb,
something that actually means something.
That's a keeper. The subjunctive verb is an interesting one. It's a weird verbal form. I think I'm remembering correctly. A really good example is the phrase "God save the Queen." Right? This is the one that was taught to me in Latin class. Like, so if you say to someone, "Go and get me that piece of paper," when you say "go," that's an imperative. Tell me what you saw. Provide an account. Like when it's a verb that's like an instruction, that's called an imperative. But the subjunctive is a bit different, because God save the Queen isn't like God, like you save the Queen. It's kind of like, may God save the Queen. And so so what they're talking about there is when they, what was it? The subjunctive verb has its place.
Yeah.
They're sort of saying that you can use rhetorical flourish. You wouldn't be saying God save the Queen. I'm blanking on other examples, but there's plenty of other.
They've got some here. The subjunctive, the verb mode that expresses possibility, wish, hope, choice, can, could, may, might, should, would, has its place, but like all communication, must mean something that actually means something. To say, without elaboration or definition, this chemical can cause cancer is at best useless, i.e. not accurate information.
Is at best useless.
Yeah. At worst, a scare tactic. If it can cause cancer, the reader must be told the circumstances or the probability under which the statement is true. If we say EPA might enforce these regulations, the audience must know if we might not. It must not be used to create an appearance that the agency is providing information when it is merely providing speculation. That's beautiful,
terrific.
right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, at the moment, my understanding is the EPA is just being run by people who want to make it as ineffective as possible. But
Yeah.
hopefully, with that kind of
Well, you know, with directive from a, you know, an orange-faced, you know, cockwobble.
it's an awful, sad situation. Scott Pruitt finally was booted out, but he was the head of the EPA for a while. That was a real ridiculous situation. You know, appointing someone to the head of an organization like that that had called for its abolition. Like, that's putting the fox in charge of the hen house, for those of you who know that analogy. But that's really powerful. You should bookmark that, Alex, and let's just hang on to that for some writing advice stuff, because that's really good advice.
This is an incredibly good writing guide. I'm
just
scrolling through it. It's amazing.
Share it. Throw it up.
Did you say it was the American EPA?
Yeah, I'll chat it.
This is you're getting an insight into how Alex and I roll anyway. Like, someone randomly finds something and we'll spend 15, 20 minutes talking about it, and there'll be some unexpected thing that leads to, you know, like eventually some lessons somewhere in a class. Yeah, can you throw it up on the share, Alex?
It's on the chats.
Oh, throw it up on the share though and go through some.
Oh, okay.
And just, you know, we want to see what you see. Eat who you eat. That's a Simpsons reference for anyone.
Let's go up to the top of the page. Yeah, so this is a style book, and this is where I got to it just here.
Oh, what is that?
Cool. Graphics guide, logo guide, 9 steps to publication. Yeah. This is it, the writing guide.
And dear students, this is because presentation and professional document composition are absolutely essential, like in the big wide world. And the better you cultivate an interest in the elements of document production, the better document producer you will be. Cool. I wonder if they have a referencing, like they might say to use APA or Harvard, or they might say to, I doubt they have their own referencing style, but that's only because they lack imagination.
Access denied. There you go. We were guided by the APA, the American Bar Association, American Nurses Association.
It's interesting, the whole idea of a style guide, that when we, you know, when we set the ABIB, the referencing for both Chicago and APA are in much broader style guides, both of which talk about grammar and usage and language just as much as referencing. Like, it's really fascinating.
Look at this.
Oh, a final point about style in general. It is not a restriction on creativity. The most creative organizations in the world have style manuals. Many of them run hundreds or thousands of pages. The most successful book publishers in New York, animation studios in California, and package designers in Chicago have style manuals. They are designed to help organizations communicate in a clear and consistent way. Staying on the road, after all, does not keep you from arriving at the destination.
Beautiful.
Hang on. Staying on the road does not keep you from arriving at the destination. So, what is it? Staying on the road. Hang on, just scroll back up. I need to make sense of that. Like, what is it? Does not keep you from arriving at. So you would, if you stay on the road, you may arrive at a destination.
But they're saying the style guide is the signage that keeps you on the road, I think is what they're trying to say. And their allegation, their implied allegation is that style guides stop you from arriving at the destination. They did. Remember, that's the resistance that we've had through our whole time in the MRes, is that paying attention to style is not what we do in the humanities, or is not what we do in the social sciences, or is not what we do in the sciences. And that's obviously bullshit.
But are they saying even if you follow our directions, and you may feel like you won't arrive at the destination, but trust us, like that still doesn't make sense to me. What you said makes sense, but it doesn't elucidate the sentence. That's tantalizingly unclear.
Capitalization.
Gender bias. Numbers. Oh, hang on, wait. Active, passive voice. Go up. Here they are at it again. 3 cheers for the people who are just hashing the usual thoughtless advice. Use active voice as much as possible. Like, how about use it when it's appropriate, which is most of the time, but emphasize appropriateness. Writing is much more lively and interesting to read in an active voice. Oh, yeah, here's an example that's clearly wrong. All other examples of the passive voice are like that. Therefore, don't worry ever about making a choice. Just learn a rule. If it's passive, avoid it. That's all you need to do, guys. Don't waste your time thinking about the words that are coming out of your fingers. Writing for kids. Is that like ew as in like bug, like ew, it's bugs, the environment. Ew.
That's cute. Nice. Anyway, digression.
Yeah. Use exclamation mark sparingly, double exclamation mark. This is good. This is nice and lively prose. Oh, learn about hyphens. Hang on. What do they got here? Commas and hyphens are typically the most difficult punctuation concepts for people to understand. Yeah, with the semicolon as well. The purpose of the hyphen is to help your reader avoid ambiguity. Good. That's really good direct advice. 2 words together to describe one word, or they come before the noun they are describing, they should be hyphenated. It helps the reader understand more quickly the 2 words together to describe the next word. For example, the free-form sculpture was beautiful. Without the hyphen, the reader might stumble whilst reading. Is it a free sculpture? What's a form sculpture? That's such good advice. Those simple little things make a huge difference. Oh.
Mm.
Oh, do you know which remote it is?
Which remote? The TV remote?
Yeah, to turn it on.
No, I don't. Sorry. Can you ask Mum? That's the
Semicolon.
big question of the day, guys. Where's the TV remote? This is the real research problem.
These are the real questions. Yeah, wow. Terrific. So everyone, so Alex has chatted that link. Can I very strongly recommend that everyone bookmarks that and like makes a point of going through it. And whenever you're like stuck on an idea and you can't express yourself, just go and open the link and read this page. Like, it's not that it will give you an answer, but this is good enough advice that just reading some good stuff about writing might help jog your thinking. Write tight. Vary your sentence length. But aim for short sentences. We're not just making it up, guys. We're not just making it up. If you can't avoid a long sentence, insert much shorter ones before and after the long sentence. Your primary job as a writer is to ensure that your reader understands your message. Yes, it's so simple, but it's never taught like that. If it is, everything would be different. About what we do would be different. To some extent, the sheer discipline of trying to write short sentences will help you make them concise and succinct. There is nothing inherently confusing about a compound or complex sentence, but if a thought or thought sequence can be expressed in simple sentences, it is easy to follow. This is beautiful. So
look at this. There are other ways to structure communication. Generally, they do not work as well.
Wow.
Like, as in everything up to here is good, but after that, no.
So hang on, but chronological, historical, dramatic, and logical, what are they contrasting it to? So like journalistic, lead selling main idea. Yeah, so it's like that where you are now. The lead selling main theme is the idea of greatest interest to the audience. Begin with it and expand on it. There you go. There's some cracking advice for you, everyone. The lead point is the idea of greatest interest to the audience. Callum, that's kind of why I was saying I liked how you started with the word rivers, for instance.
Oh, and there we are, rivers. Oh, and Jack, I was very impressed. Here, why don't I stop sharing now? I was very impressed that in Hasto's presentation, I saw in the reference list a person with the surname Fish. Callum in his presentation talked about fish, and colleagues, Jack and I, before the class started, have been having a discussion about fish. Jack.
So I found a book. I'm going to pull up the page here. I discovered it by, I'm a massive podcast listener these days, like probably 20, 30, 40 hours a week of podcasts in my ears. Like I don't listen to the radio anymore. I do news on podcasts and then other stuff, and listening to loads of interesting things, and discovered a book yesterday called Why Fish Don't Exist. So I am going to share this with you. I've ordered a copy. It was a little bit expensive in the end. It was like $55 to get from the States because I think it's new and not in paperback yet. But I was compelled, and I was like, it must be mine.
Remembering, guys, that you're speaking to the two guys, Jack and Alex, who first became friends over discussing the book that we wanted to write. There's no such thing as religion.
Yeah.
Taxonomy is kind of something that we're interested in.
Yeah, like seriously, there's a bunch of guys who run this thing called the Religious Studies Project, and we were like friends with them. They were gonna do a whole bunch of mini books, and Alex and I had met each other, and then they sort of put us in touch because we were in the same place and said, "You guys want to work on something together?" And there's no such thing as religion, in the sense that the category religion is just like an abstraction to describe a whole bunch of disparate human behaviors. Like just like there's no such thing as a primate, like. As an animal, there's a concept that helps us organize all these actually existing animals, but there's no you can't draw a primate. You can draw an example of a primate, but the concept primate is an abstraction. So the concept religion is an abstraction, and that's not just a philosophical point. That's relevant because when people say like religion is good or religion is bad or religion versus science or like anything like that, it's kind of thoughtless, and it's because it's so generalized. It's actually just a failure to communicate clearly. Like my kind of simple rule is never say the word religion. Always use at least two words. In like if you're talking about religious traditions, talk about religious traditions. Don't talk about religion. You know, if you're talking about religious metaphysics, talk about religious metaphysics. Like whatever. You can just always go at least one. Talk about monkeys, not primates. You know. So. Am I sharing this? Why Fish Don't Exist? So it's written by a journalist. NPR is National Public Radio, America's kind of like ABC, sort of, a little bit. Let's have a look at this. Why Fish Don't Exist, a story of loss, love, and the hidden order of life. A wondrous debut from an extraordinary new voice in non-fiction. Why Fish Don't Exist is a dark and astonishing tale of love, chaos, scientific obsession, and possibly even murder. David Starr Jordan, this guy here, David Starr Jordan was a taxonomist, a man possessed with bringing order to the natural world. In time, he would be credited with discovering nearly a fifth of the fish known to humans in his day. But the more of the hidden blueprint of his life he uncovered, the harder the universe seemed to try and thwart him. His specimen collections were demolished by lightning, by fire, and eventually by the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which sent more than 1,000 of his discoveries, housed in fragile glass jars, plummeting to the floor. In an instant, his life's work was shattered. Many might have given up in despair, or given in to despair. But Jordan, he surveyed the wreckage at his feet and found the first fish he recognized and confidently began to rebuild his collection. And this time he introduced one clever innovation that he believed would at last protect his work against the chaos of the world. I don't know what that is. That's a good tease. When NPR reporter Lulu Miller first heard this anecdote in passing, she took Jordan for a fool, a cautionary tale in hubris or denial. But as her own life slowly unraveled, she began to wonder about him. Perhaps instead he was a model for how you go on when all seemed lost. What she would unearth about his life would transform her understanding of history, morality, and the world beneath her feet. Part biography, part memoir, part scientific adventure. Why Fish Don't Exist reads like a fable about how to persevere in a world where chaos will always prevail.
It's a little bit like the thermonuclear Armageddon or whatever.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, that's a really nice, slightly watered down version too that you could sneak in even more widely. Like in a world where chaos will always prevail, I think we should just go for Tuesday night. Or whatever.
The book I'm reading is related to what you guys have been talking about. It's called Why They Can't Write. And it's really interesting. It's a bit frustrating as a I'm sure you guys will find it just as frustrating, but how we teach writing, we teach people to be poor writers, and then people have to unlearn that to then be good. And it's actually like, I sit there reading it and I'm like, yeah. Like, anyway.
We know how to teach writing. Wow. I hope parents, teachers, parents, and administrators across the world read
The world.
his trenchant book. We're the reformers we have been waiting for. Oh, we, as in all of us, probably. We are the reformers we've been waiting for.
Yeah. I don't know. I've not gone to this part of the site. My mum bought me this book, but yeah, it's kind of down the. If you go down a bit, yeah, it's kind of.
So there seems to be widespread agreement that when it comes to the writing skills of college students who are in the midst of a crisis, in Why They Can't Write, John Warner, who taught writing at the college level for 2 decades, argues that the problem isn't caused by lack of rigor or smartphones or some generational character defect. Fully agree. Instead, he asserts we're teaching writing wrong. Warner blames this on decades of educational reform rooted in standardization, assessments, and accountability. We've done no more, Warner argues, than condition students to perform writing-related simulations, which pass temporary muster but do little to help students develop their writing abilities. I'm sure you guys all feel somewhat that way as well. This style of teaching has made students passive and disengaged. Worse yet, it hasn't prepared them for writing in the college classroom. Rather than making choices and thinking critically, as writers must, undergraduates simply follow the rules, such as the 5-paragraph essay designed to help them pass these high-stakes assessments. In Why They Can't Write, Warner has crafted both a diagnosis for what ails us and a blueprint for fixing a broken system, combining current knowledge of what works in teaching and learning with the most enduring philosophies of classical education. This book challenges readers to develop the skills, attitudes, knowledge, and habits of mind of strong writers. So this is good because Alex and I are feeling that when you have a short amount of time with people, the best way to help people with writing is not to focus on grammar, is to focus on mindset. Because when you when you can get a much more confident voice as a writer, you write better. Even if grammar is not great, if the structure and the idea and the flow is good, it's like, okay, we can tighten this up. But that was really strong.
I agree. Like grammar is something that can be edited, whereas the idea and the tone is very difficult. Like,
great way to put it. Yeah. And so many of those things about tone depend on your choices as an author, as it says here. Where does it say? I can't remember.
Somewhere.
Oh yeah, making choices and thinking critically, as it's especially making choices. Like, we assume everyone's thinking critically, but then there's like so many choices about how you introduce a topic, like how you sort of lead in and go. And so often you just come up with something sort of off the top of your head at the start, and then that sort of stays kind of how you introduce that topic, even if there's a logical sequence of the information that you've got to present, even in the sense of like experimental results or something seemingly quite dry. There's still a lot, infinite varieties of how you as a writer can communicate it. It's difficult art. So great one, Caitlin. I wonder if that looks pretty new. Would it be on book?
I think so. I know. Once again, thanks Caitlin's mom. She ordered it online. I don't know where she got it from. But yeah, I don't know if it'll be up there yet.
No, there you go. Oh, there you go.
Hey, there it is. Nice.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thanks, world. Sorry. for the greater good. Sorry. Excellent. Anyone else got any book tips? This is something else I'm reading actually at the moment. Getting started with Arduino. This is the book the little booklet about how to design, how to use the Arduino, which is like a microcontroller, sort of like a mini computer thing, electronics sort of wonderland. What is anyone else reading stuff, or got any good tips, or found something interesting or whatever?
I've just started to read Bill Bryson's A Short History to Nearly Everything in the World.
Oh yeah, I've never read that. Is it good?
Yeah, I think it's good. It goes, it brushes over a heap of scientific phenomena in a very easy to read way. Like, it's not boring or dry or anything. He uses lots of examples and refers to like historical characters like the guy who discovered the quark particle, and talks about it. He makes it enjoyable to read, so it's not dry.
Like little vignettes or whatever that sort of capture like historical developments, like a bit of a random selection of interesting little snippets. Is that?
Yeah, and he'll talk about, say, how the scientific world figured out the age of the Earth and the process for that to happen, like all these characters that came along, what they did, eventually leading up to what we know today.
Nice, good one.
Yeah, it's a good book.
Anyone else? Does anyone have any questions about the POP? By the way, we've just done half an hour, I think, 25 minutes of pregression, as it were, rather than digression, because we didn't even set foot on the path from which we could digress.
Just to regress for a second, on the topic of colour palettes, I discovered that the New South Wales EPA does have a colour palette, or at least they seem to.
That's go on.
I noticed for their air quality water index, they have a color, a specific set of colors that they use to indicate, a certain tone of green is a certain quality of air. And so I went and had a look in their water too, and they seem to have at least a green color for good water. That would suggest to me that if I kept on digging, there would be other stuff. So dig a bit.
That's really interesting.
At the very least, you'll find a color palette that isn't default green and default red. And as Matthew Butterick says in Practical Typography, like whenever you can deviate from defaults, system defaults, it's a good thing because it helps your document stand out, and it means that you've given a bit of thought to the presentation of your document.
It's why I hate Calibri and Cambria as fonts, and why one of the most common tiny little sting, presentation sting, people for some reason so often don't change the font in the footer, and usually it's like the page number is the offender because the way that it gets formatted, and just like seeing that little like Calibri, it's like a little dagger in the eye. So yeah, did anyone have actual POP questions?
Excuse me, sorry.
Hi Cynthia. Hi.
I'm sorry that I was missing the previous part of the section. Then I'm trying to. I would like to. I'm not sure if this question have been explained by you because I missed the previous part. But I would like to have some recommendations on how should I structure the presentation, like. Because I'm thinking about giving the research question at the beginning, and then go through the background and the literature review. Would you think that will be a problem?
That's good. That's a good question. Jack and I were actually talking about what somehow we got from talking about the structure of presentations to fish before we started this class. So we were actually talking about what advice can we give people about generally structuring a presentation. So it's a good question. It's a salient question for sure. And what we were getting towards in our discussion was that generally the structure of the document tells you roughly how you should structure your presentation. That is, insofar as the document is structured with, you might not necessarily need to think about the abstract, but you've got a background section in which you outline like what's led you to the questions that you're asking, and then you've got your methods, and then the impact section is like what comes out of the research essentially.
Let's jump in.
At least kind of three kind of structural points to think about.
I think we should add the abstract though, but what we should do is translate that one in particular. The other three you're going to summarize. But what's that?
Translated into a title page kind of thing.
Well, no, even more so. Like the abstract is designed to like hook the reader and just get them to make sense of the document before they get into the details. That's what your opening should do. So Cynthia, I kind of like the idea of when you say introduce the research question first and then backtrack. What you need to do though is there's something even before the research question, which is setting up the context. So like it's not that effective to say the very opening sentence would be like, the research question of this project is X, and I'd like to explain why. Like, that's not quite as engaging as maybe spending 30 seconds talking about the sort of context, the problem, in the same way that, you weren't here, but Callum was talking about, you could, as you watch back this video, Callum started talking about rivers, which is the kind of general topic of his project, and then got into the project itself. So do you want to maybe explain a touch more, like what are you thinking when you say you want to introduce the research question first? How are you planning to do that? Is there like a little, how are you going to help the audience understand what the context and aim of your project is?
Because I think because I am doing the study about the Finnish Lunar New Year festival, and I think and through the festival, I'm trying to examine the changing nature of Australia's multiculturalism. And because I think there are some studies on this subject before, and I would like to highlight that how I'm using this festival as part of the study of the multiculturalism, because multiculturalism itself is a very big topic. But because the previous study that I found on the festival is just part of the change in Chinatown. So I'm thinking, and also, and because this is also where I start the research, is like I saw the petitions of the name changing of the festival online, and I think that's really interesting, and that can propose maybe trigger some interest from the audience.
Yeah, I think it's, you'll need to organize those thoughts a little more, but I think that all of what you've got there could be an effective opening. If you sort of very quickly establish the notion, well, you need to do kind of two things there. You want to establish the broad notion of multiculturalism, both as a sort of a cultural national phenomenon and as a sort of a topic of study and academic discourse in Australia. And then your example of the Lunar New Year Festival as a kind of a case study for a snapshot of, you know, Australia's changing multiculturalism in 2021. So you might like what you might be able to start by saying something like, most members of the panel will have heard of the Australian New Year Lunar Festival. That's, you know, prominent it's on the news every year. Most Australian cities have a large Chinese community, so it's quite a a well-attended, important celebration. And then you could say, like, you know, introduce that. Most people will know that, and then somehow make the point that it's a really interesting case study in Australia's evolving multiculturalism. Multiculturalism has been a big thing in Australia, like especially in recent history, since the kind of 60s and 70s, when post-World War, migration, multiculturalism, big part of Australia's national identity. Here's a little case study. That way you can sort of justify going straight to a very particular case study while helping the audience understand that it's part of this bigger thing. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I made much sense there.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can do that quite quickly, and then somehow or other in a short time, and then do as you said, like back up and go, cool, so what's the actual background here? And then how am I going to do it? Like it's really quite effective if in some way the start of your present, this is why I was saying you could think about the abstract in a written document is going to help the reader understand the context and like the problem, or like what's interesting, what the real point is. A good abstract is going to do that, right? So a good opening 30 to 60 seconds in a presentation is going to achieve the same function. It's going to help the audience, kind of understand where we are in the intellectual world, and it's going to help them kind of get a sense of the stakes of the problem. Because then they'll stick with you. Then they'll sit with you and unfold. It's when you make the audience wait even for the point that people can kind of be unclear. So rambly advice, but hopefully that's helpful for you, Cynthia. Any other further questions about that, or other questions about the proposal?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, Alex and Jack, I've got a question.
Fire away, Matt.
And again, I came in an hour late because I was at school. Just in terms of getting our dates for our actual presentations, is it our schools that are going to make contact with us to tell us when they're scheduled for? Is that correct?
In a perfect world, Matt, that's already happened.
Yeah.
In a world under conditions of COVID reorganization, it may not have happened yet, but yeah, that's. Alex, have you heard anything about their POPs?
Sorry, I know I'm not Alex, but Matt, I haven't heard from School of Education either.
Okay. Cool.
So I was gonna reach out to you actually as well and just be like, have you heard anything?
No, not yet.
I've heard nothing.
Okay, cool.
I received an email from Chui Beng, 20 minutes ago.
Ooh,
about it.
Ears are burning.
There you go, Caitlin. That could be good news.
So which says that she's working on it at the moment. She says she's arranging the panels.
Okay.
I just wanted some confirmation about stuff from me. So she's obviously doing it. So I expect you'll hear pretty soon.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks,
Is
guys.
anyone else unclear?
Yes, I'm unclear as
I
well.
was going to ask about that as well. I wasn't sure. So Mike is supposed to get back to me then about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I'll be sending a reminder. So a number of weeks ago, I sent all of the MRes coordinators, associate deans, all of those people who are in charge of things, the email saying, please make sure you arrange your POPs. Usually people need reminding. That's
The MRes is still only 5 years old. It's just not. It's just not in the institutional DNA. Like, it's kind of got a little foot in when people kind of know POPs now. It's still just
understandable under the circumstances. I suppose, because there's just so much else going on. But you should have heard by now, definitely.
And then a quick follow-up to that is another issue we wanted to mention with you, which we probably should have said at the start, but the difference and lack of difference between a live presentation versus a pre-recorded one. We understand that School of Science is doing pre-recorded, and our understanding is that a lot of others are going to do sort of live stuff. Does anyone else know for sure whether they're live or recorded?
I just assumed for the School of Education, speaking to my supervisor, that it would just be a live Zoom session. And then when I did read the other day in your email about recording, I thought, oh, am I supposed to be recording, or can I present it live? Or
did I say live or pre-recorded? Did I just say it's likely that you'll pre-record?
No, you said something about narrating the.
Yeah, well, either way, whether it's live or recorded, it would be just you talking to slides, like rather than probably you just talking to camera.
Yeah.
That's all I meant.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for checking, but it's a bit of a different beast. I don't know even which I'd prefer. In some ways, the pre-recorded one you can kind of spend more time getting right, but it's also, there's something to be said for just getting in and doing it live and getting it all out of the way and letting it all happen in the moment. So I don't actually think there's a whole lot of difference, though. I'm sure some people have preference for one or the other, but I think in the end, whatever you're asked to do, there wouldn't be a disadvantage or advantage either way. I certainly don't think it's the case that anyone who's pre-recording is going to be like massively advantaged by that, which some people might assume, but I really don't think that's the case.
We did I think ours is going to be pre-recorded for School of Science. And we had sort of like a test run with our conference. We had a HR conference a week or two ago, and they're only 3-minute recordings.
And were they the same, as in like record a pre-record with a live? I suppose there's no Q&A for a 3MT, but how did it work?
Well, yeah. So it was basically you would have your scheduled block, and you'd have to be there to look at everyone else's pre-recorded stuff and to ask questions. But then when yours came up, when it was scheduled, everyone would watch it, and then you'd have to be there to answer questions. So it was essentially expected, that you'd be answering questions. Pretty much everyone got a question or two, so they had to be there.
And how many people were like in this Zoom meeting?
It was split up into, I think, 4 or 5 topics. So each room had about, from what I remember, maybe 15 people. So it would have had the people who are presenting, as well as a few of the other, I don't know, academia. So I think it was about 15. Yeah. It was, and at the very start when, doing the introduction stuff, there was about 90 to 100 people that got split up into their different topics. So, it was a decent turnout. But yeah, I think with the pre-recorded stuff, it does help a little bit with the anxiety. You're like, oh, I already got it recorded. It's done. Now people just have to watch it. It just means you have to watch your stupid face talk and hear how stupid you sound. But, at least you know what other people are looking at. And then, so I think it does take a little bit away from the whole, I guess, presentation you feel. You're not there doing it in the moment. But
the first live moment is the question. So you're not all sort of physiologically warmed up.
Yeah. That's definitely, you definitely got to have the thoughts in your head already going before the questions are asked, because otherwise you'll just be like, I don't know, everything's gone out my head already.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Refer to the video, please. Cool. Well, so any other questions or thoughts or anything of that nature? We've still got about 10 minutes left if anyone wants to get some last stuff.
Jack, I have a question regarding using an example, please.
Go for it, Aris.
So my supervisor mentioned that maybe sometimes it's worth using an example or two just to make it more interesting and more relating to people who are listening to your POP. But the issue is, can I just share my draft presentation so that you can have a look?
Yeah. Throw it up. We'll have a quick scan.
So mine is really underprepared compared to what Colin and Chris did.
That's all right. Outline's fine.
So the advice I've got was quite similar to what Chris did. So we need to kind of limit the number of slides to maybe a maximum of 5. So definitely I've got too many.
Yeah.
Mine would be on machine translation, and I kind of narrow it down to to the focus on literary text in machine translation. So basically I'll have to cover translation series for human translators as well as those mentioned in machine, because they are not totally the same. And then I'll have to give some background information on the currently types in use, and mention that the 2 that I'll be studying would be these 2. And then when it comes to using examples, if I want to, because for literary text, contextual meaning is really important. So that's what I'll have to focus on, because for machine, it's really difficult for them to figure out, the relevance thing, because that's most likely built on personal experiences, like culture and language, knowledge, etc., etc. But for machine, it's more like either they draw on linguistics rules or they work out the translation based on the statistics they have been given from the corpus built by those computer scientists or programmers. So it's a lot of things to cover, and it's just too broad. And when it comes to using an example to make it really appealing or interesting, I kind of I was feeling quite lost in terms of which kind of example I should use. Will that take too much time? Is it really worth using it? because I don't have really enough time to cover everything, because this part takes, I'll have to cover a bit of the background and literature review, and then I'll have to go to the methodology part, which
you could, I think you could probably, one thing we have, a little trick or strategy we haven't talked about yet is including some slides in the presentation after a like conclusion slide that can effectively be like in discuss. You could say, and if the panel would like, I have a few examples as an appendix which we could discuss in questions. So you could explain the story, and then if they, you know, if you sort of both cheeky and you do it well, then it'll be something that they naturally want to ask. So you can sort of buy yourself an extra 3 minutes at their invitation, you know, by getting them to ask you about the thing you want to talk about. Because what I've just, from my quick look at this, what you'll need to do is really, it's not clear what the research problem is. Like what you want to be really clear about is like, even these questions, they're sort of interesting, but they're not yet like, maybe it's a bit different if you talk to it. But I think really early when you start, talk about machine translation. Great. Go up to the first couple of slides. Yeah. So number 3 particularly, yeah. Like after that, like tell us what the problem is. What is the problem? And then your research project will only be like a tiny little sliver of a case study into that problem. Yeah. Right? But you've articulated it to like a couple of times pretty well verbally, like as in the way that these things are actually influencing native languages, because people are writing assuming that they're going to be translated. So like help and you know, you can say this phenomenon, there's a really interesting linguistic phenomenon going on related to machine translation, and my field hasn't looked at it.
Okay.
That's the stuff you need to get, like you can build it in maybe to this part, this research questions part, but like kind of like we're saying with an abstract should make the reader understand very quickly what the problem is, what the stakes are. You need to tell your audience what the stakes are. Like tell them that there is a problem. Tell them that there's this really interesting thing going on that you as a bilingual, you know, you could give the specific example you've observed.
Yeah, ultimately it's something that we can't do or can't think properly about. That's the problem. Like what can't we do at the moment, or what can't we think properly about at the moment? And everything kind of launches from there.
And I think for you, Iris, correct me if I'm wrong, but we as in represented by you guys in translation theory, we humans represented by you specialists can't don't yet have a proper good analysis of the some of the effects that machine translation is having on the production of text by native speakers in some languages. Is that like a simplified version of your problem, of the issue you're looking at?
No, not really. So I had a couple of meetings with my supervisor, and she said, also due to the difficulty in the methodologies part, so the original proposed idea was kind of like abandoned, because in terms of finding out to what extent this machine translation has already affected people's native language, it's really difficult to quantify or to define. So we kind of like changed it.
Okay, so then if for literary translation, so what you need to do then is explain like what's the, like, you know, quickly say that obviously literary translation has taken place as a human activity until very, very recently.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have machine translation, but now that machine translation's come, it's translating heaps of stuff, but it's also getting used for literary translation, which has normally been the domain of humans. Like this is something we need to know more about. Does it work? Is it effective? What are the problems? What are the issues? Like those kinds of things. So whatever it is, like set up the issue, which is that we suddenly have machine translation even for literary translation, and we don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
You've got to set that up really, really clearly, because if you need to set up the context in which the research question makes sense. So you might need like a slide before this, or you might need to like pack it, fold into here, some kind of indication about the research problem.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And also I've got another question about how we move on, like during this presentation, because sometimes I felt a little bit awkward to just mention which slide I'm touching on. So when we say during the presentation, now it has come to the methodology part, or is there a better way to articulate that?
Good question, right? Very good question to think about. My advice to you is be more confident than that, and you don't need to announce the slide. The slide will announce itself when you change to it. So when you know, going from translation process to, all right, let's say you're on contributing factors and you're going to go to methodology. You're going through this stuff. So the methodology I'm going to use is this. Don't talk about the slide. Talk about just the contents on the slide.
Okay.
Talk about the methodology, not the fact that the slide is about the methodology. That's just not, that's a waste of time, diversion of the attention of the audience. So kind of finish what you're going to say on a slide and click through, and then as you're talking, the slide will announce itself.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I can understand
Easier
that.
said than
It's just
done.
when it comes to how to put that into sentences, it's sometimes I got stuck. Like I stuck there, and then my brain went blank. I couldn't find a good way to express myself. And
yeah, I mean, it's a very understandable challenge. And I don't know if everyone's different for these things, but in terms of preparation, I think it's generally best if you can practice your material well and use the slides as your prompts, because if you plan text to read, that can work well, but you can get kind of lost in it and it can sound a bit lifeless. Whereas if you're able to if you know what the point is of each slide, you've practiced it, you can talk, you can maybe have yourself some bullet points so you don't forget to mention anything in the moment. That might, Iris, help you. When you're talking more naturally, it's usually easier to make transitions that are just easy.
okay.
So, yeah.
Sorry, the final question is about the reference. Is it really necessary to have reference if we don't really don't have any direct quote, or is usually we would have?
No, not necessarily. You can have, you could even have, if you had a quote, just have the in-text reference on the slide and no reference list. Like you can very legitimately say, and I refer the reader, I refer the audience, I refer the panel, because not the whole audience, but the panel will have your proposal. I refer the panel to my reference list, to the reference list in my submitted proposal.
Okay, fair enough.
If they don't like it, they can, no, this is being recorded. I won't finish that sentence.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Iris.
Thanks.
Any quick last ones?
Yeah, sorry. How are everyone? Sorry, probably I might have missed the first part as well because I came in 47 minutes later.
That's all right.
I actually don't know. I'm a little bit confused about the number of slides that we are supposed to come up with for the presentation.
There's no strict number, but what you should just imagine that it's a 10-minute presentation. You don't want to go too quickly through slides. So you're only going to want to have a maximum of about 5 or 6 slides. You can have a few more. Like I think Callum had probably closer to 12 or something, was it? I'm guessing something like that.
Yeah, 10, 12 last time I did.
Yeah, but Callum, you moved through them fairly quickly, and some of them get moved through quickly. So
yeah, I think I had 16 slides.
Yeah, which is quite a lot. It's surprising that you can.
Some of them were just pictures.
Yeah, that's the thing. When they are just pictures, you can get it. So Damascus, we don't want to give you a strict number, but I would say keep it really simple and aim for kind of 4 to 5 slides, maybe plus a title and any questions sort of slide. But it really doesn't need to be more than that.
Yeah.
Because remember again that the panel has your proposal. So you can say, as outlined in my proposal, like here are 3 bullet points. As outlined in my proposal, I'm going to be using this methodology, that methodology, and that methodology. Hasto, that's something you could do to avoid having to do a big reference dumping thing in an actual slides. You could kind of point people to, or even if you,
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So anything else, Damascus? Any other questions?
I think that's all right. Yeah, I'm following up.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, very quickly, how do we usually start with the POP? Like, what do we usually say to make it really, I don't know, the way it usually works? Do we just say hello and this is my research proposal?
You can do that. I guess there are two ways. One is to say some introductory words. The other is to do what Callum did, which is that the first words that you utter are just about your topic. You know, so you could say, humans have translated works between languages for as long as we have written records. But now in the 21st century, we've reached the age of machine translation. This is popular, you know, in a whole bunch of ways. This is used in a whole bunch of ways, but it's even increasingly being used for literary translation. Or there are proposals about whether it could be used for literary translation or whatever. And then within 15 seconds, Iris, you've like conjured the problem, the context for the audience, and they'll stick with you and they know what's going on. Like, I kind of think that if you can find a way to avoid like, hi, this is my presentation, I'm about to talk about my presentation, and it will be a presentation in which things are presented that are presented as they will and have been presented. You know, then it's much better to start with the straight to the point. Like, this is what happens in any good storytelling. Like, if you watch a TED talk, if you listen to like The Moth or whatever, they will do, like the Moth, there's some really interesting advice that I think helps you even as a writer. So The Moth is like a storytelling thing, 10, 15, 20-minute stories in different parts of the world. They have a really strict, they open up a pitch line, like, so you can call The Moth and give a 2-minute pitch, and if they're interested, they'll call you back. And what they say, they strictly say, do not start by saying, this is a story about the time I ... Start by saying, I was 15 years old and I was standing in a barn just at sundown. You know, or what it start like by putting by invoking the reader's imagination straight away and creating narrative in the reader's mind. Like it's kind of what a focus line does in an abstract. Like, think about that. Think about what a good focus line for an abstract would be. What function does it serve? It prepares the reader for something you're about to get to, the really important point. But it just steers their cognitive attention exactly where you want it to. And then you tell them what the point is. Do the same in speech at the start of your proposal.
Okay.
Like, you know, you could all, everyone could find a way to do that. You know, Matt, you could talk about how much we know about students and motivation and how little we know about teachers and motivation. Straight off the bat. Hi, you know, compelling intro, and then, hi, my name's so-and-so. Let me tell you about my project now that you already know what my project is about. So really good question.
I'm just sitting here, kind of listening to everyone and looking at everyone or their names, and thinking how powerful, like, if you can make it work, starting with the words that describe your project is really, really interesting. Like, so if it's Iris, translation is the first word, probably. If it's Matt, motivation is the first word. Like, motivation is a common topic of research, you know, about students. And then the second clause is what you're actually interested in. But we don't know a lot about teacher motive, you know, whatever. You know, it's just and then if you're really going to kind of go whole hog on the trying to complete the narrative, then the last thing that you say in that 10 minutes will answer the first sentence that you uttered in the 10 minutes. And if you've done it really well, your listeners, your readers, will remember that first sentence as you utter that last sentence. And just cognitively, it'll all just kind of click into place for them. And, you know, that's so hard to do that. Like, I don't know that I've ever done it.
And it'll do that at various points throughout as well. Like, it's when you get to the research question, it'll be, oh, boom, well, that obviously makes sense because of the narrative. So that moment of locking on to the context you set up at the start will happen a few times for the audience.
I don't know how many of you guys have been to academic conferences, but academic conferences are generally the best place to go for advice on how not to give presentations. Like, because the typical academic conference presentation is presenter stands up when told to by the chair, goes over to the computer. Then there's like a minute or two of fiddling around trying to get the USB the right way up, and then the thing won't load. And then how do I make it full screen? And you know, then they talk about themselves for a couple of minutes. Then they talk about their project kind of generally for a couple of minutes. And then they start, and like already like 7-8 minutes is gone of the 20-minute presentation, and they haven't even started their presentation.
And they'll read something that's composed more for human, like visual digestion than oral digestion. This is the big. You have to be a really good script writer for a script to be written in a way that works for speech. That's why it's always better to do your best to memorize your material, like learn it and give yourself prompt. That's why slides are so great, because they're prompts that will help you remember what to think about. And if you design your slides really well, you can design them as memory hooks for you to make sure you go through things in the right way. You can use animations and fade-ins to stagger information and all of that to help your reader not get lost on 3 points on a slide and all of that. Like, yeah, I don't know, there's so many ways you can improve the way that your message gets across if you commit to being a communicator. And that involves understanding that written stuff is not good for speaking.
It's a fun, I really relish the challenge of presenting, because it is a completely different art to writing, but it relies on the same kinds of rhetorical strategies. You still have to kind of introduce the problem in the same kind of way.
You're still trying to engage the neurons of a fellow human. Like quite you're trying to hook them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really struck when I was working with my son the other day on his storytelling that he's doing for his little project. And it was funny, we were listening, Callum mentioned before the brief history of, what is it? Brief history of everything.
Brief history of nearly everything.
Nearly everything. Yeah.
Good qualifier.
Good qualifier. And is that the one that starts with him talking about how he wanted to know how scientists knew things and he didn't understand how scientists knew things?
And he talks about he does talk about the writing and how it's often hard to understand what they've written and things like that. And he wants to translate that to make it easier for other people to understand.
And I was explaining to my son that fundamental structure of what is the problem, and then everything that follows in the story is the kind of rising action, as it's called in literary studies, to kind of get to the point at which the problem is solved, and then the falling action is the conclusion where you explain that what happens in the world after you solve the problem. That fundamental structure is the same for pretty much every kind of communication action that we do that is long form, more than a few sentences.
What was
the same for like scientific articles, humanities articles, fables, like fairy tales, novels, movies, like all of them have the same basics.
Even as we've learnt this afternoon, reports by the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah.
When then the most important thing was first. Put it first.
Yeah.
Don't bury the lead. That's what it's called, burying the lead. I think we talked about that somewhere, but it's a good phrase. Don't bury the lead.
And so that like, if you roughly follow that structure, like, what's the problem? What are we going to do about it? What happens afterwards? Like, it's really easy for a human being to follow that, because we have hundreds of thousands, millions of years of evolution to prime us to be able to follow that structure. And it's like how your presentations should go. It's why starting with the problem is a safe bet, because you know that if your reader catches the problem, or your listener, catches the problem, they'll be there with you for the rest of the 10 minutes. They'll at least know what you're trying to do.
So there it is, guys. Simple.
Know how to solve every problem that's ever been solved.
Done. We've done it. I had a smart ass, not even friend, he was sort of a brother of one of my friends who's just a crazy kooky guy, bit sort of black sheep of the family for many years in many ways and whatever, but crazy weird like physics nerd. And one day he proudly declared that he had finished science, like as in he had completed it. He had managed to resolve like, you know, quantum theory and some other thing. But he was just this glint in his eyes, like, man, I've finished science. So that's all you guys need to do is just you know, we're always just one step away from finishing science, finishing the project of human knowledge production, and then like then we're done. Like then we've achieved it. We've got the degree. We've finished science. We've done it, and then we just coast on that knowledge forever. Needless to say, I wasn't entirely convinced that he had in fact finished science, and I regret to say that I didn't follow up and request the paper. I believe he had written a paper, yeah. So, any other questions before we offer a sort of a non-teary but quite sincere farewell?
Certainly. Sorry, I might probably want to ask this stupid question again.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, you know, the Pope is all about your verbal presentation of your thesis, right? And you have a copy that you give to the supervisors, or the supervisor, or the panel there. And has ever this been put into account or considered that there are people who come from different parts of the world, and probably someone is doing his research in English, but at the same time he is going back to his country to do his research in his own language, which is probably Chinese or some French and all that sort of thing. And so my question is there any accommodative
any accommodation for that kind of situation?
Oh, yes, yeah.
It's a great. Go on.
Yeah, everything is there. I tabulated in a piece of paper. The board, the supervisor and the team, the panel. They are looking at it, and I'm trying to explain to this, that, and along the way, because I'm not from an English-speaking background, and I missed that, and possibly it's there on the paper. Is this, you know where I'm exactly coming from?
I think I understand, what you're getting at, Damascus, and it's a really like legitimate concern and difficulty. I mean, the simple answer is that there isn't really accommodation for that in the same way that for an English language university, a thesis must be written in the English language. I mean, it's certainly for the purposes of assessment and things like that. That's part of the assessment policy of the university, that assessment takes place in English, except in an instance where it is a translation exam where you've got, or a foreign language kind of unit. The point is to demonstrate that. So what it speaks to really is the sort of inequities, global geopolitical inequities, the legacy, ongoing legacy of colonialism, even in situations that feel like they have nothing to do with colonialism. Like the world is structured by that kind of Anglo-American, Euro-American sort of world domination that sort of happened, you know, from around the 1850s onwards, quite a lot later than a lot of people imagine. And leads to situations like this, where formally by all the rules of the institution, you know, people are invited to participate, but under certain rules that advantage some over others. And usually advantage the people who already have advantage. That's
exactly. That's one thing that I seem to pick. And it disadvantages a lot of people who are capable of expressing their research in their language, say French or whatever, or African tribal language or something, and come into that context, you'll be found wanting.
Yes. Look, it really is just, unfortunately, an unfair dynamic where, you know, in some sense, unless the university were to operate at a really fully bilingual or multilingual level, it needs to operate. All of its formal business needs to be conducted in a single language. And that is just an inherently unfair situation. That, you know, it's sort of unquestionable to me that we have so much intelligence in the world. Even, you know, say international students and people with English as a second language, whose real deep intelligence and creativity and insight, just they don't have the language skills in the language that's got the power. So therefore they can't capitalize on their knowledge and creativity and skills in a way that they might with different language skills. So, like, unfortunately, Damascus, my blunt answer is there's not really an accommodation, and it's a case that one has to meet the standards that are imposed by institutions and the broader national legal context in which they sit. So I hate to be so sort of unoptimistic, but I want to be as honest as I can to your really sincere and important question.
Exactly. So that's fine. Thank you very much for that.
Just to blame it all on colonialism, Damascus. You have my permission.
That's all right.
Maybe not all of it, but it's certainly the legacies are of that whole
and capital, basically colonialism and capitalism.
That's what the same thing. Yeah. Colonialism is the extension of capitalism to territory. Colonialism is essentially, it's not spreading culture, it's spreading markets. Like if you study the history of colonialism, really the desire for spreading culture is a fig leaf for the desire to increase control of markets, which means either places to sell things or places to acquire resources. Like that is the history of colonialism, and it is like the dynamic of capitalism. So they are intimately related.
Okay. Well, Anna, thank you very much for answering that question.
Thanks for asking it, Damascus, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I'm looking forward to a review of why they can't write from Caitlin.
And actually, maybe a crib notes. If there's a red thread, Caitlin, just like if you could distill the essence of the thing into some basic points, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, as in now.
No.
Is this like a 3-minute thesis thing?
No, at some point in the next sort of anywhere from the next sort of 1 to 52 weeks.
yeah, that's a good time frame. I haven't read a lot because I've just been so busy, but yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for sticking around for so long, and of course for all your efforts in the MRes core units. Handful of you, 1 or 2 still in Writing Beyond the Academy, as we said. So there's a couple of people still kicking around with us, but this is the big kind of moment, and unfortunately we can't kind of drown our sorrows in pizza at the moment, or drown our celebration.
Well, there's some sorrow.
Rescue our sorrows from drowning with pizza. What about that?
Yes, there we go.
Becky added an unrelated side note in the chat there. Voting for
drinks and pizza with the RD2 squad mid-semester break if people are interested. Mid-year break. Yeah, good idea, Beck. Are you thinking actually live, like once we can reconnect in small groups? Which I think we can as of.
Yeah, I reckon we should do a catch up and do pizza and drinks all together.
Yes. And what we'll do though is we'll campaign, because it's not the POP session, we can ask for pizza again. We couldn't ask the Dean to reconsider this one because she said no to this one. But if there's a new event, we'll see if some new money's freed up.
Yeah.
No, but I reckon we'd all be happy to buy ourselves a pizza and a beverage after this.
I know, Beck, but this is one of those things where, like,
I know.
I'm happy to work overtime, and it's like, no, like, I don't even want you to work overtime.
I just want my $4 pizza.
Yeah. Quick tip on pizza. I mentioned before, it's the Woolies is doing these, like, I think Aldi does them as well, like 3-pack cheese pizzas. They're pretty awful on their own, but they're like $6, and like you can just put a little bit of extra toppings on them, and you can make yourself a pretty damn good pizza. Like $2 a pizza, you cannot beat that for a little freezer jobby. Yeah. Anyway.
But yeah, the get together sounds great. It'd be lovely to get together.
I agree.
Because at this point in semester, Jack and I are always a little bit sad because we have to say goodbye to you guys. You know, this especially for those of you who aren't in Writing Beyond the Academy this semester, like this is it in terms of our relationship with you guys, our formal relationship with you guys for the rest of your candidature. So, you know, we wish you all the best, but we'll miss you, and you know, we'll miss being able to, you know, see you every week and hear how your projects are going.
And so the point is, make sure you stay in touch with us, and we
send us
like,
a postcard.
especially if there's only one time yeah, anytime, yeah. And if there's only one time you contact us though, about a month before your thesis is due, and you want to talk about formatting, that's something we can, because that's something we can, within 1 hour or 2 hours, we can help you with quite significantly, quite seriously. Like 1 hour talking about any details of the project is a bit trickier, but about presentation, formatting, that kind of stuff. And can I just note that, Callum, you're increasingly looking like a secret source who's talking from an undisclosed location.
I'm going to turn my light on.
Caitlin's saying, can you subscribe to Jack Rants? Well, Alex and I,
it's a pretty good name.
We should.
That should be a podcast, Jack Rants.
Letting off steam, yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got actually the Australian Sweatbathing Association. We're getting our kind of newsletter back up and running. And we've got some new sections, including member contributions. And one of the sections is called Hot and Bothered, which is a rant, sauna rant section. We'll see how we go on the rants. I love doling them out, but doing them anything other than organically can be a bit tricky.
I've started developing a plan to put the Gilexicon online.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I think the world needs to see the Gilexicon.
This is
the Gilexicon, for the uninitiated, is the collection of words that Jack and I have made up.
Yeah.
It's extensive.
Yeah. Word of the Day podcast. Yeah, that would be good, actually. I would love to do some podcasting. Alex and I actually, how's this for a podcast? We genuinely want to do this. Don't have time now, but I think it'll be idea that'll have legs for a long time. A podcast called Talking Research. The idea is every episode you get some authors on who've just published a paper. You aim for like a wide disciplinary spread, and a bit like the conversation appeals to anyone who's interested in anything, especially when the authors make it interesting. But you presume zero specializations, like a translation thing. Talking research, so, and you kind of help. My experience is that loads of people are really interested in research, but it's usually presented in pretty inaccessible terms, either physically through paywalls or like linguistically, methodologically.
And we want to kind of dive into the story of the research and the paper, like a little bit like how Blabcoats does, but specifically in like a paper, or a book.
So you can look forward to that never materializing, just like every other kind of idea. But this is a good place actually to teach you about the 500 to 1 rule. I think this is a great life rule. Okay, my friends and I, my friend said something like, "Oh, we always have, I lived in a share house, great ideas, great friends, many years, lots of fun, lots of banter." My friend said, "We have so many ideas that we just never do. We always talk about doing shit, we never do it." And I was like, "No, it's not. That's the wrong way to look at it." Like, I figure if one idea out of every 500, like, is a genuinely good one, like it's a little, we did, oh, that was a great idea, I'm glad we rearranged the lounge room like that, or I'm glad I decided to go and do that thing, or like that was like 1 out of 500, you got to be in it to win it. If you're like a creative person, you're having, ideas here and there all over the place. Like, it's like drafting, write crap, like just commit to having heaps of ideas. 500 to 1, great ratio.
Word. So, with that, good luck to you all. May your research progress adequately.
Should we wave bye to everyone on the recording?
Yeah, bye to everyone on the recordings. See you later.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, stay in touch and remember us when you're famous. And
thank you.
Email us for the new address for the royalties.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there is going to be a new address, isn't there? Because we're moving.
Oh, to PSQ. Yeah. They're kicking us out of ED, and we've got to move to PSQ, probably with no offices and a shitty little inadequate space that we'll do the best to make vibey as hell.
When is that going to happen? Because I left some stuff in the room.
Yeah, and that I'm not sure if it'll affect. It may well affect that as well. Likely to, but yeah. And the university clearly also appears to have given it no thought with regard to the implications. But given that we're still recording, I should probably leave my commentary at that. Not that I expect anyone to listen to what's now 3.5 hour video. God. All right, I'm gonna.
It's better than Lord of the Rings.